Chapter 102. Let's continue. I'll be your driver for free today. You can treat me later or you can tell my fortune or something. Can psychics tell fortunes? Telling the location of an enemy. Asking for the location of a goddess. This is also changing fate. Why isn't it called fortune-telling? Cragburst grinned in laughter. He looked down the car window and saw Ink's earnest appearance. He couldn't help but reach out to pinch Ink's neck. Hey, do you feel like you're being petted on the head? Luonan wouldn't tell him that Ink was just a cover to coax him. He simply replied, "Stop messing around?" Luonan's all-encompassing mental senses were inexplicably touched. The window of the blue MPV in front had clearly opened up a crack. It was as if something was ejecting out. It was extremely small and its speed was very fast. It collided with the car behind it in practically an instant. Then the senses were interrupted. The Tiger Burst Jeep and the blue MPV were separated by two cars. The senses were interrupted twice. When they reappeared, they were already on the hood of the Tiger Burst Jeep. Luonan's mental senses always had a resolution problem. This time was no exception. He could only faintly sense that it was a tiny beetle-like object. It seemed to have pierced through the two cars in the middle before pouncing onto the Tiger Burst Jeep. Then he completely lost his senses. At this time, all four windows of the Jeep rose up, forming a sealed space. Without the whistling of the wind outside, the rumbling of heavy metal was much more ear-piercing. Cragburst was a bit startled. He snapped his fingers. "Open the window." The voice control command was given, but the car's AI didn't respond at all. Not only that, but the car even began to slow down and turn. Luonan's warning cut in, "Careful, there's something, F***ck me. I've been bewitched." Cragburst cursed at practically the same time, but he soon calmed down. In the next few seconds he tried using hand control, voice control and other methods, but it was useless. The windows couldn't be opened, the speed couldn't be changed, and even the stereo couldn't be adjusted. The car's AI firmly controlled the Tiger Burst Jeep. It turned into a downward trajectory, circling around the skyscraper, and spiraled down. "Is it a virus?" Cragburst judged. "No, it's more like a mechanical bug." Luonan spoke of his observations. "In any case, someone is controlling it from a distance." Cragburst came up with the most reasonable explanation. "We've been discovered." Aside from Cragburst and Luonan, no one could see that the AI in this arrogant and domineering military-modified Tiger Burst had already gone out of control. The Jeep moved steadily along with the rolling traffic, but it was getting further and further away from its target. At this moment, Cragburst and Ink were imprisoned in this sealed space. They didn't know where they would be taken. Cragburst stopped all of his attempts to seize back control. He swept his eyes over the constantly changing environment outside the car. His eyes unexpectedly flickered with an exceptionally excited light, and the corners of his mouth perked up once more. He turned his head to Moshui. "You must have been discovered, but they are targeting this car. You can continue." As soon as he finished speaking, he heavily elbowed the car window beside him. The tough bulletproof glass instantly exploded into fine cracks like a spider web. If intelligence wasn't enough, violence would make up the difference. Cragburst's eyes didn't even blink when he treated his beloved car in such a manner. He extended his hand and tore down the glass window that was already on the verge of collapse. He casually tossed it into the back seat. His other hand suddenly grabbed Ink. He didn't care how the bird struggled and he simply tossed it out the window. "Go. Don't let me down." Ink was forcefully tossed several dozen meters away, just in time to avoid the downward trajectory of light. It spread its wings just in time to avoid the tragedy of smashing into the glass curtain wall of the building. Luonan shouted through the Hexier, "What the hell are you doing?" "I want to know what they're doing." Cragburst laughed boldly. His bored attitude from before was completely swept away. "You go keep an eye on them first. Keep in touch. I want to see where they can take me." He extended his hand out from the broken window and waved. Then a hoarse and berserk roar rang out. "Smash your chest open. Embrace the gentleness of blood." Oh! Ink spiraled within the neon-glowing mist. Luonan's soul body hovered motionlessly in the center of Ink's spiraling and fluttering axis. 2 seconds ago, the blue Jeep carrying Yen Yonghua had left the range of his senses. Actually, if he really wanted to give chase, he could easily catch up to them with the speed of his soul body flying through space. However, so what if he caught up? The anti-reconnaissance equipment on the Jeep raised Luonan's vigilance greatly. If he continued to forcefully chase after them, not only would he alert the enemy, but he would also expose his identity and abilities. Luonan's thoughts spun rapidly, and he made a decision in the blink of an eye. Cragburst was clearly worth paying more attention to. Yin Yonghua had taken the initiative to help. Right now, the jeep had gone out of control and Luonan was in danger. Luonan would feel uneasy if he didn't help. Also, Luonan was quite concerned about that mechanical bug. Luonan's soul body suddenly descended, carrying ink as it chased behind the Tiger Burst jeep. The Tiger Burst jeep maintained a stable speed, and its direction was the same from start to finish. The jeep continued to descend after changing tracks twice to switch traffic layers. The tyrannical body of the jeep continuously ran parallel to several low-altitude public transport vehicles. They intersected and plunged head-first into the suddenly dimmed layer. The jeep passed through the dividing line between light and darkness. The clamor of the metropolis was suddenly separated by a layer in everyone's senses. Even the heavy metal vibrating within the jeep seemed to be rendered with a layer of irritation. The jeep's headlights cut through the outer walls of the surrounding buildings. The damaged outer walls, the messy graffiti, and some suspicious black and red colors converged together. The recycling layer. Due to the phototaxis of living things, people would always yearn for areas with fresh air and sunlight. This was especially true in the bustling area of the city center. The skyscrapers were dense, and the low-altitude transportation network extended in all directions. The residents of the city would go up and down. Sometimes they wouldn't truly set foot on the ground for several years. A low-altitude public transport 30 meters above the ground was already the limit for most people to descend. This was how the high-altitude race got their name. The problem was that Xia City was an enormous city with a population of 200 million. It never had the qualifications to waste space. It was inevitable that there would be some people within the population of 200 million who had to survive in the dark and damp space of the lower levels. Without a doubt, this was the slum of the modern city. It was the recycling layer that specialized in disposing of the city's trash. To a certain degree, it was also a place where gangs gathered outside the law. The Tiger Burst jeep roared as it charged down from the upper levels. It practically instantly attracted the gazes of a large number of professionals in this gloomy space. A sharp whistling sound rang out. Between the buildings, within the ever-narrowing alleys, high-powered modified motorcycles started up one after another. They sped along at high speed. People of all shapes and sizes on the motorcycles brandished malevolent spiked clubs, chains, and of course firearms. They howled and cursed at the jeep that was still advancing along the light rail in midair. At the same time, they were also looking forward to it. Chapter 103. The light rail ahead has been destroyed. Automatically switching to off-road mode. The car's AI automatically issued an order. Several seconds later, the enormous Tiger Burst jeep slid down from the final port. Its four wheels landed on the ground, and it rolled over the primitive and shabby asphalt road as it continued forward. 20 to 30 people had already gathered together. They were the nearby gangs and motorcycle gang members. They cheered in unison. There were even more daring people who sped up and used their spikes to push against the side of the jeep. They sped up, leaving behind clear and distorted scratches on the jeep's body. And when they passed by the car window, they made a humiliating gesture towards Cragburst. "You pig flaunting your wealth. I'm going to poke your ass until it explodes." Cragburst cracked a smile and returned the same gesture. "Come. I'm afraid you're not tough enough." The curses outside grew even louder, but Cragburst didn't care in the slightest. He looked all around him, comparing the surroundings to his memories from his early years. If he remembered correctly, the road the jeep was driving on had nearly 30 years of history. It was originally designed to be some sort of main road in the city. Moreover, it was connected to some transportation route in the wilderness. It was a two-way road with 12 lanes. No matter how you looked at it, it was a fairly high standard. But in the decades that followed, enormous changes occurred in the city's planning. Countless skyscrapers rose from the ground, and their shadows covered the road from all sides. The buildings protruded horizontally, cutting the enormous road into fragments. They completely covered the sky above the road. Following the complete abandonment of the management of the recycling stratum, this road could only be submerged in the layers of shadows of the skyscrapers. The illegal buildings of the surrounding residents wantonly covered both sides of the road. At this moment, there were countless eyes within those grotesquely shaped buildings. They stared intently at the jeep that whistled past. It was hard to understand what they meant. So many years have passed and this damn place is still a mess. What are the gangs in charge of this area doing? Cragburst placed his arm across the empty car window frame and shouted towards the outside, "Hey, whose territory is this?" Don't you guys usually clean up? The gang members outside the jeep paused for a moment. Then their threats and curses grew louder by more than 10 times. There were already people who couldn't bear it any longer. They drove their motorcycles closer and the sound of air being cut rang out. A thick and long steel chain lashed through the car window. It was a force that could split a person's skull open. Cragburst just lifted his arm and let the chain smash against it. He even coiled it twice before swinging it slightly. The person who attacked was like a kite that had lost control. He flew from his beloved high-displacement motorcycle and was smashed horizontally. This was too ruthless. The motorcycles at the back couldn't dodge in time. In an instant, half of the motorcycles were flipped over. It was a mess. Modified humans? No one knew who shouted this, but the motorcycles that accompanied them all the way dispersed. Some people had already braked and stopped on the spot, no longer following them. But at this moment, a motorcycle that was originally behind them sped up and soon ran alongside the off-road vehicle. The rider grinned maliciously at the car, raised the thick barrel with one hand and pulled the trigger. The classic shotgun instantly ejected 12 8mm tungsten alloy pellets, covering the entire front of the carriage. Without even looking at the result, the knight swung his arm and loaded the gun. He was about to do it again. But when he raised the muzzle of the gun once more, what met the muzzle was Cragburst's malevolent smile. Cragburst's face was completely unharmed. There was a muffled bang as the rider flew up from the motorcycle. He crossed 8 lanes of traffic and flew into the illegal buildings at the far end. Cragburst leapt out from the car window and took his place. He sat steadily on the motorcycle and snatched the classic shotgun. He roared and used the shotgun like an iron rod. He rushed forward and rushed back, knocking down a group of reckless gangsters in the blink of an eye. He had been cooped up in the car for over 10 minutes, acting as a moving prisoner. That feeling wasn't good at all. The motorcycle beneath him was a bit small compared to his body size, but the feeling of being able to move according to his will and move at will was really great. Cragburst laughed heartily and accompanied the Tiger Burst off-road vehicle. He roared to his heart's content along with the surging melody. As the vehicle advanced forward, the gangsters who had fallen to the ground quickly disappeared without a trace. Only Cragburst and the off-road vehicle remained on the road for a time. Cragburst was singing to his heart's content when he suddenly stooped down and accelerated without any warning. He pulled away at least a body's length of distance in an instant. He caught a glimpse of a line of fire cutting through from the corner of his eye. A hole the size of a wash basin appeared on the road 20 meters behind him. Only then did he hear a peculiar hissing sound enter his ears. Cragburst chuckled. It was a large-caliber electromagnetic rifle. However, the shooter's aim was terrible to the extreme. That's not right. The shooter didn't have any intention of following up after missing the target. He suddenly sensed something and followed the trajectory of the bullet. He couldn't see any human figures within the pitch-black floor, but there was a pitch-black bird flapping its wings and flying. Cragburst grinned and transmitted through the hexa-ear, "Where's the division of labor? Where's the trust? Speaking of which, you should be pretty good at scouting. How about we go back and give the wilderness a try? Then you need to be prepared to be tricked." Luonan casually replied. He used ink to announce his existence to Cragburst. But what truly killed the sniper was actually the human-faced arachnid siege hammer. Right now, the pitiful fellow had fainted in front of the window. He probably didn't understand what was going on from start to finish. Luonan's sole body floated within this dangerous area. The range of his senses was close to a kilometer in diameter. An omnidirectional, multi-layered, panoramic picture was presented to him. He suddenly discovered that he should be the most genuine sniper at this very moment. He was in existence like a ghost. He had a panoramic perception with a diameter of a kilometer. Of course, he also had the siege hammer, which could ignore the vast majority of physical defenses. These factors converged together. He could be said to be like a fish in water in this complex environment. He could eliminate those malicious personnel in the quickest and most convenient manner. Luonan truly had some awareness of being an ability user when he used these methods. Yes, this was the ability user of his imagination. This was an extraordinary power that stood above the normal world. Naturally, this was the best proof of the correctness of formatting theory. It was also at this time that Luonan truly understood what kind of restriction his weak fleshly body was when it came to his true abilities. "Hey Scout. Go ahead and update your intelligence. This instance's level is too low. Did your enemy specifically use this place to annoy me?" Luonan responded, "I feel like you should stop the car and properly inspect it. Maybe you can find some clues." "Good idea. But this doesn't contradict with scouting ahead. I need a tool. It's best if it's a moving obstacle that can stop my disobedient baby. Let me look. Chapter 104. Crag Burst's military-modified Tiger Burst SUV was an extremely astonishing vehicle for personal transportation. It could run over the heads of ordinary private cars in its off-road mode. However, the big fellow that had just run into the range of Luo Nan's mental senses could completely replicate a similar scene onto the Tiger Burst SUV. 5 seconds after Luo Nan discovered it, the enormous shadow that slowly pressed over finally attracted Crag Burst's attention. The enormous size of the shadow caused Crag Burst, who had been wild and fearless the entire time, to gape subconsciously. He forgot to speak for a time. It was a super heavy road roller. It was over 5 meters tall, and its enormous body occupied 2 car lanes horizontally. It was completely the willful piling of industrial power. Just the vibrating wheels in front of it already exceeded the roof of the Tiger Burst SUV. Perhaps this big fellow was a large tool used in the construction of this main road back in the day. Its appearance was already extremely old. The driver's compartment was already missing its top, and its entire body was covered in grotesque graffiti. However, it had undergone certain modifications. Long and sharp blades were installed on both sides of the vibrating wheels. This allowed it to cover the width of over 4 car lanes. The weight of the vehicle was at least 50 tons. The already damaged asphalt road became even more tragic under the effect of the vibrating wheels as it drove past. Of course, the antique road roller's speed was very ordinary. It definitely didn't exceed 30 kilometers per hour. If the SUV were to turn around, it would be completely easy for this old fellow to eat the dust behind it. Or it could make a small detour and easily pass by it. But the problem was that the AI that controlled the SUV's movements didn't have any awareness that it was about to be smashed into pieces. It continued to maintain its original speed, direction, and route as it moved forward in a perfectly straight line. Crag Burst did his best to wake his precious up, but it was destined to be futile. The distance between the two sides quickly became 300 meters. 200 meters. The Tiger Burst SUV contributed to the majority of the distance traveled, and it continued to do so. Luo Nan noticed that there were at least 5 gun-wielding personnel in the damaged compartment of the road roller other than the driver. They all raised their gun barrels and pointed them at Crag Burst's position. 2 of them were electromagnetic rifles with astonishing destructive power. Only the heavens knew how these strictly controlled military firearms ended up here. Did the military also dispose of trash here? Out of the way. Luo Nan threw 2 siege hammers over as he warned Crag Burst. The targets were precisely 2 gang members wielding electromagnetic rifles. One of them fell to the ground and fainted. But a bewitching red light suffused the eyes of the other person. He was actually completely unaffected. He quickly adjusted the muzzle of his gun, and flames exploded on it. The metal bullet carried a terrifying initial speed. It crossed a distance of several hundred meters in an instant, directly piercing through the location of Luo Nan's soul body. This shot did not touch anything substantial, but it truly gave Luo Nan a fright. The other party's spiritual sense was very sharp, and his judgment was very accurate. What was even more inconceivable was that he was immune to the siege hammer. Luo Nan had pierced through all of his material defenses, but it seemed that Luo Nan's attack aimed at the mental plane had missed. That gunshot had alarmed Crag Burst. The other 3 firearms had already opened fire at this time. They were old-fashioned gunpowder weapons that were commonly seen in the black market. Their power was quite astonishing. Crag Burst cursed loudly. The motorcycle suddenly sped up and swerved outwards, dodging the whistling rain of bullets. It narrowly brushed past the twisted blades of the road roller. Luo Nan was left behind. Crag Burst let the motorcycle run away crookedly. Crag Burst jumped up, and his strong body easily leapt over 4 meters into the air. He directly stepped onto the cockpit of the road roller and smashed it with a heavy fist. The driver was sent flying from the other side. Only now did the others adjust their muzzles. But no one was able to block Crag Burst's fist. They fell from the road roller one after another. Crag Burst instantly cleared the obstructions. Then he tried to control the big fellow beneath him to make it stop immediately. As long as it didn't move, Crag Burst's beloved Tiger Burst Jeep wouldn't be smashed into smithereens even if it couldn't avoid a collision. The distance between the 2 vehicles was less than 50 meters at this time. A collision and a crushing would only take 2 or 3 seconds. Crag Burst had operated this type of large-scale machine before. He felt that he could do it. But then Luo Nan's sharp warning sound penetrated the bottom of his heart in the form of psychic waves. Dodge. Luo Nan's lack of professionalism was completely exposed at this critical moment. Though he gave a warning, he didn't indicate the direction of danger. Cragburst needed to make his own judgment. Fortunately, Cragburst had ample experience. He was able to discern the degree of danger from Luo Nan's hasty attitude. He didn't hesitate at all and leaped out from the cockpit. He didn't even stop on the road roller, he just flipped over. A plump metal pineapple was tossed into the air at nearly the same time as his movements. It fell right into the cockpit. *CKME. Cragburst was shocked when he saw this scene from the corner of his eyes. A grenade. And it was a defensive grenade with the most terrifying killing radius. This sort of crude old-fashioned weapon had an enormous destructive power. It still had a certain place in the military. It could receive miraculous effects in special situations. The grenade was clearly pressed in someone's hand. The person had calculated the time to ignite it. It exploded with a bang while still in midair. Over 1,000 shrapnel were like a whistling storm, covering a vast space of 50 meters. With such an astonishing killing radius, even the gang members who had just fallen from the car were swept up. They screamed miserably. Cragburst wasn't known for his agility, but his mind worked quickly. He borrowed the force to rebound just as his body landed on the ground. He caught up to the road roller with a stride and stuck his body to the side of the car. His series of judgments couldn't be said to be incorrect, but someone was waiting for him here. A fist came smashing straight at him. The fist's speed and timing were all grasped to the peak of perfection. But the most shocking thing was the inconceivable weight. Cragburst received it with a single hand, but his entire upper arm was forcibly deflected. He could only watch helplessly as the heavy fist smashed into the side of his face. Cragburst soared into the air amidst the flying shrapnel and tumbled to a spot a dozen meters behind the road roller. An enormous rumbling sound came from right in front of the road roller at this time. The 5-ton Tiger Burst Jeep collided with the 50-ton road roller at a speed of nearly 100 kilometers per hour. The former's kinetic energy was reduced to zero in an instant. The front of the car caved in and parts exploded in the air. It was a tragic sight to behold. Although the road roller didn't immediately roll over the Jeep, it maintained its previous speed after a slight pause. It continued to push the scrapped Jeep forward. More and more parts of the Jeep were swept up by the vibrating wheels. It seemed that the most miserable fate was unavoidable. Luo Nan had witnessed everything that had happened before and after the road roller. He was stunned for a time. But at this moment, his attention was placed on the person who had caused all of this. Yes, it was the person who had ignored the human-faced arachnid's siege hammer attack. The person who had played dead when Cragburst boarded the car. Then the person who had tossed out a defensive grenade and seized the opportunity to strike Cragburst down with a heavy punch. Now the person had jumped from the road roller onto the Tiger Burst Jeep. Chapter 105. Luo Nan was already able to clearly see the person's appearance. He was a white man, a rare sight in Xia City. He looked to be in his 40s, maybe a bit older. The scars on his face showed that he had been through a lot. Of course, Luo Nan had a deeper impression of this person's left eye. It was a mechanical eye. If one looked closely, they would find that there were no decorations on it. The cold metal structure, as well as the red light in the center that made one's heart tremble, made it difficult for one to treat it with a normal heart. This guy isn't a normal human. Luo Nan's mental senses had been covering the target this entire time. He discovered that this person's appearance was just as it indicated. The metal composition and related structures on this person's body were far greater than that of a normal person. They're modified humans, right? Cough cough, damn it. Cragburst's voice came through the hexa ear. Cragburst had been struck down from the car by a fist and had been covered by the destructive shrapnel of the grenade. If Cragburst had been a normal person, he would have died a long time ago. However, Cragburst had reported his safety to Luo Nan at the first instant. Cragburst also understood the relevant information of the enemy, displaying his robust physique and experienced. Modified humans? Luo Nan had some understanding of the relevant concepts. He saw that there was still some time before Cragburst would catch up, so he used his senses to scan in greater detail while exchanging information with Cragburst. You're saying that he's like the military's mechanical warriors? What mech warrior? He's just a modified human. There's no other way to describe it, and this modification has been abolished for almost 20 years, at least on the surface. Is he over 40 years old? Yeah, pretty much. That should be it. He's pretty good at using military equipment and he's pretty good at scamming people. But a guy like him must have special privileges. He has to report to the SCA every year. Why is he here? Cragburst felt that this was incomprehensible, and so did Luo Nan. The gang members of the recycling stratum might seem lawless, with all kinds of weapons, guns and grenades, making it a mini arsenal, but that was because the government had basically given up on the governance of the recycling stratum. As a matter of fact, most of them had extremely low clearance due to their criminal records. Under the strict control of the credit clearance network in today's society, they could only be tyrants on the recycling stratum. Once they stepped out of the recycling stratum and into the public, they would be closely monitored. If they did anything sensitive, law enforcement officers would appear above their heads and send them to jail. It was hard to imagine that a special forces soldier who had undergone military modification would come here to make a living. His special authority was as eye-catching as a lighthouse on the SCA's surveillance network. The government would never allow such a dangerous person to work with the gangs in the recycling stratum. As for special situations like committing a monstrous crime, it would be more meaningful for them to escape into the wilderness instead of here. No matter what, this guy has angered me. I will have a good talk with him. Cragburst gnashed his teeth on the other side. But soon after he slapped his thigh. Found it? It's here. Keep an eye on him, I'll be right there. He found the high-powered motorcycle that had fallen in the middle of the road, turned around and chased after it. In about half a minute he would be able to fight for his reputation again. Luo Nan focused his attention on the altered human. Actually, Luo Nan was more interested in this person's current behavior than in identifying his identity. After striking down Cragburst, the altered human arrived atop the heavily deformed jeep. It tore apart the roof and entered the driver's compartment, which could no longer be seen. Next, the altered human smashed the control panel with a punch. He extended his hand inside and fished for something. Luo Nan couldn't help but associate this scene with the loss of control of the car's AI and the metal bug ejected from Yen Yonghua's car. Without a doubt, Yen Yonghua had done something to the jeep. His methods were certainly closely related to the metal bug that had sunk into the jeep. From then on, the development of the situation deviated from the normal track. And right now this altered human seemed to be acting as a liaison, a recycler retrieving the metal bug. This kind of behavior was quite compatible with the recycling stratum. And from this point of view, perhaps the metal bug was a very crucial thing. Perhaps it involved some deep secrets of Yen Yonghua's? Luo Nan's mental senses became even more meticulous when he thought of this. Though his soul body couldn't do much right now, he wanted to lock onto the target of the other first before considering his next step. The altered human was certainly aware of his detection, just like how he had sensed the siege hammer. However, his thirst for his target clearly surpassed everything else. He just raised his head and shot a cold glance, but he didn't actually lock onto Luo Nan's position. He just continued to lower his head and search. Suddenly, the altered human's arm that had extended into the control panel paused for a moment. His cold and stiff face had a change, forming into a slightly sinister smile. Then he pulled his hand out. His fingertips were pinched with a metal bug the size of a grain of rice. It was motionless right now, more like a work of art than a tool. The altered human raised the metal bug before his eyes. It was like he was looking at a treasure, carefully sizing it up. The smile on his face deepened with every glance. The intensity of the red light in his mechanical eyes continued to grow. Luo Nan took advantage of the metal bug's appearance to use his mental senses to cut across its surface in an attempt to understand its internal structure. But he discovered that it wasn't easy to balance distance and precision at the same time. He was separated by a distance of over 100 meters, and the precision of his senses was at most on the millimeter level. It was already very difficult for him to analyze the interior of the jeep. Right when Luo Nan was considering whether or not he should get a bit closer, a high-powered motorcycle rumbled from behind the road roller. Soon it circled around the reamer and ran alongside the deformed jeep. Cragburst gave a provocative gesture to the driver's seat atop the motorcycle. "Hey, come at me again if you have the guts. I'll let you use only one hand." The altered human, a smile faintly faded. His ice-cold mechanical eyes cut to Cragburst's side, but he didn't immediately respond. Cragburst's provocation continued, but it was mixed with something else. "I, Cragburst, used to be from District 55 of the coastal garrison. Give me your name. I'll burn incense for you later." The altered human's lips and teeth opened and closed slightly within the jeep's driver's seat. He spoke for the first time, but the feeling was that he was mocking Cragburst. "A soldier? You're not?" Cragburst discovered that there was a problem with his judgment. so there was no need for him to be polite. He was just about to exert his strength to leap and attack. But in the next moment his opponent made an odd move. The altered human opened his mouth and stuck out his tongue. He placed the metal bug between his fingers on it, rolled it up and sent this toy into his mouth. There was even a clear swallowing motion. He actually swallowed the metal bug. Chapter 106. As soon as he finished speaking, Black Jack leaped up and jumped down from the other side of the cockpit. His timing was perfect. At that moment, the road roller pushed the jeep to the place where the gang member's car had been flipped over. At that moment, the group of people had yet to leave. They stayed in the middle of the road and looked at the road roller that was moving slowly towards them. At first they were dumbfounded. Then they shouted and wanted to drive their motorcycles around it. But at that moment, Jack jumped down from the jeep and grabbed a motorcycle. He then sped up, circled around the other side of the blade and sped back in the direction he came from. "You were a boss just a second ago and now you're dodging?" Cragburst cursed loudly. He lifted the front wheel of the motorcycle and forcefully made a U-turn. The motorcycle scraped dangerously past the twisting blades, and then the engine roared as it accelerated in pursuit. The speed of the two motorcycles was more than 100 kilometers per hour. In the darkness of the night, they disappeared in the blink of an eye. It wasn't a problem for Luonan's soul body to chase after them, but Ink had some difficulties. The two motorcycles had already driven out of his range of senses during his moment of hesitation, and they chased after them. On this side, the road roller pushed the off-road vehicle, rumbling as it rolled over. Everywhere he passed there was a mess. The gang members cut a sorry figure as they hid to the side of the road. They cursed Cragburst, but even more cursed Jack. Luonan's mind stirred slightly. He listened attentively and discovered that some of the content was very interesting. But it was fragmented and fragmented. He was unable to grasp the gist of it. Because of his attention, Ink also came over and it was very eye-catching. One of the gang members was annoyed and happened to have a gun in his hand. He raised his hand and was about to shoot, but in the blink of an eye, he fell to the ground like a wooden stake, unconscious. The gang members who had been happily scolding him were all stunned. They looked at their comrade who had suddenly fainted, then looked up in a daze. At this moment, Ink spiraled down and stopped on the eaves of an illegal building by the side of the road. It looked down at the group of weak chickens known as the gang. In the darkness, the black crows stared at you with their dark eyes. On the ground were their companions who had inexplicably fallen because they had offended them. Such a scene made the dozen or so members of the gang at the scene all weak in the knees. Crow continued to remain silent, and the more it was like this, the more anxious and uneasy it was. Luonan actually felt a bit awkward being by Ink's side. He didn't want to stare at each other like this. Gathering information was the most important thing right now. The problem was that Ink was a crow. How could it communicate with humans? It would be better if it was a parrot. He could see the benefits of the Hexier and the psychic wave network right now. Otherwise, he and Cragburst wouldn't have been able to connect. Oh, psychic wave network? Luonan's train of thought jumped once more. If it was just a network connection, then the heavily chained crow within the format pyramid would also count? At this moment, there was an additional image of a crow in the format pyramid. It was Ink and it was on the second level, which was the staff level. Of course Luonan didn't understand bird language, but his communication with Ink was telepathic. There were no obstructions at all. Even with the foundation of hypnosis, the smooth communication between the man and the bird was beyond common sense. If it could be done between humans and crows, what couldn't it be done between humans? Luonan made a decision as soon as his thoughts reached this point. First, he needed to establish a connection and use the heavily chained crow. But what value did these gang members have in absorbing them? Luonan was still a bit of a neat freak. He hesitated for a moment before his thoughts spun. Perhaps he could use something else instead? The human-faced arachnid's gloomy, cold, and bizarre gaze swept across the group of gang members. Of course, none of the gang members were able to see the human-faced arachnid. But being targeted by that bizarre crow was enough to make them panic. The group of people were stuck between a rock and a hard place when the crow suddenly spread its wings and screeched. It was hoarse and unpleasant to listen to, causing everyone to shiver. More importantly, a weak yet inexplicably clear voice directly rang out in the depths of their minds at the same time the screech rang out. It coiled at the bottom of their hearts. "I ask. You answer." "Oh my God." Miserable and panic-stricken cries rang out. Some people turned around and ran. At the same time, there were also people who didn't make a sound. Their eyes rolled back as they fell to the ground. This time Luonan really didn't do anything. This brother was the one who fainted from fright. Of course, the gang members who tried to escape soon received a siege hammer that was neither light nor heavy. They didn't faint, but they were in great pain. They fell to the ground, clutching their heads as they screeched. From start to finish they saw this savage and bizarre scene. The gang members literally froze to death on the spot. Monsters, mutants, black technology. All sorts of absurd thoughts came and went, but they really didn't dare to move their feet. The road roller rumbled away into the distance, gradually disappearing. The road surface was silent for a time. I ask. You answer. Luonan repeated his previous words. At the same time he was also paying attention to the changes in the format pyramid. The human-faced arachnid was located on the technician level. It was currently the center of all the changes. Following Luonan's decision, this Darksider species spat out a spider silk-like thread, projecting it into the turbid flow of emotions. The human-faced arachnid was like a skilled fisherman. It used the spider silk to hook up fish one after another. It tossed them to the lowest level of the format pyramid to stand side by side with the images of Xie Junping and Cat Eyes. However, they were much fainter. They were like fragile bubbles that could burst at any time. In the real world there were over a dozen gang members. Without exception, all of them were brought under the control of the human-faced arachnid. There was nothing that could be easier than this when the emotions of fear spread wantonly. As the mastermind behind the scenes, this was the first time Luonan saw how the human-faced arachnid controlled its target. He was stupefied for a time, so it was actually this simple? In any case, with the establishment of the local area network, and the formation of the mental connection, the following matters would be much easier. A spiritual wave was transmitted from the Hexier approximately 2 minutes later. Cragburst had taken the initiative to contact him. Fuck. Scout, where have you been? Luonan was able to guess the result just by listening to the emotions in her voice. You lost them. That black rat. He can't do anything else, but his ability to dig holes in alleys is top-notch, and he even shot from the back. Hey, where's the scouting ahead? Your speed is over 100. I can't keep up. Of course, Crow wasn't able to keep up. Luonan obviously wouldn't explain this to Cragburst. F***CK, 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 F***CK. Cragburst let out a string of expletives. You need to pick a useful one for your spirit attachment. You need to be fast. Something like a peregrine falcon or a spear falcon. Aren't they all good? What's with a crow? Luonan didn't get angry despite Cragburst's complaints. The more Cragburst complained like this, the more it showed that this big guy who came from the military didn't treat Luonan as an outsider. Moreover, Cragburst began to trust and rely on Luonan's abilities. This was a very good start. Sure enough, Cragburst came to his senses and felt embarrassed. He coughed twice. Since I know you have this ability, I'll help you buy a good bird from the society later. As long as the price is right, it's not impossible to get a mutant. Sure. You can help me pick one later. Chapter 107. Who the hell knows where I am? Let me look at the map. Oh, Riverwu District's Deshang building. The top looks bright and fresh, but the bottom looks like this? Deshang? Luonan remembered that this was the information he had just obtained. It looked like Cragburst's pursuit ability couldn't be underestimated. They were already very close to their final target. Wait a moment. I'll be right there. Ink soared into the sky, shuttling back and forth between the intersecting buildings. Luonan's soul body rode the human-faced arachnid to the side. The crow's flying speed was really too slow. The human-faced arachnid didn't even use a third of its strength. It followed leisurely. Luonan didn't put any energy into flying. Instead, he used the panoramic view of his mental senses to observe this dark place that he had heard of for a long time but had never set foot in. The turbid night of the recycling stratum gave him a very subtle feeling. At the very least, he didn't have too many experiences of flying in the night sky. It was more like he was swimming in a stream. And as time passed, the panoramic view cut open the deepest parts of this area and presented them before his eyes. This feeling continued to deepen and mutate. It wasn't just water. It was sewage. Everything presented in the panoramic view. The concrete details were far too jumbled and messy. There was no time to analyze them one by one. However, the things that were briefly scanned, such as gangs, prostitutes, drug dealers, casinos, and the abstractions of violence, lust, greed, numbness, and so on, interweaved and dyed together to form countless turbid colors that splashed over his head and face. Everything converged into a roaring turbid current that washed over the entire recycling stratum. It converged into the surging tide of emotions that drowned the entire Xia city. In the end, this was just a tributary. It was a bit dirtier. The human-faced arachnid was quite comfortable in this environment. It was like a fish in water. But soon Luo Nan discovered that the human-faced arachnid wandered in the turbid current of emotions. It had a slight appetite. Weren't these turbid negative emotions the food it craved the most in the past? This fellow relied on these sorts of things to grow stronger and stronger. But right now it seemed to be disdainful. Luo Nan tried to communicate with the human-faced arachnid. His analysis of the human-faced arachnid's information was far from complete. If he forced himself to understand it, there would be a lot of confusion and ambiguity. In the end, he could only confirm one thing. The human-faced arachnid had already undergone a certain level of evolution, so much so that its original food was no longer able to satisfy its needs. After all, there was no fish that relied on drinking water to survive. Perhaps the evolution of the human-faced arachnid was equivalent to a transition from a plankton to a fish. Should he congratulate her? Right when Luo Nan was racking his brains over the problem of the human-faced arachnid eating, the Dashang building was already in sight. Cragburst had been waiting impatiently for a long time. Right now he was standing on the 10th floor of the skyscraper, gazing into the distance. When he saw ink flying over, he waved his hand excitedly from afar. "Hurry, I found an entrance here." Ink flapped its wings, searching for a place to land. How could Cragburst wait any longer? He pointed to his shoulder and said, "Over here, I guarantee your safety." Luo Nan wasn't polite with him. He gave Ink an order and directly descended onto Cragburst's shoulder. Immediately, the two of them began to exchange information. Everything below the 30th floor of the building, including the underground buildings, has a zigzag structure. The division between the inside and the outside is actually an isolation zone. Many of the buildings adjacent to the recycling stratum are built like this. Cragburst had researched quite a bit of information while he was waiting. The isolation zone is a one-way passageway. Security is tight and all permissions are locked down. There are no normal channels to enter the business district of the building from the recycling stratum. It's the same no matter who it is. Outside of the isolation zone is the world of the gangs. They have dug through countless rat holes here. They have dug through not just the Dashang building but the neighboring buildings as well. There are quite a few people living inside. Luo Nan listened to Cragburst's chatter and matched this part of the situation with his own understanding of the information. He organized his words and said, "According to the information I've obtained, there is an underground fighting arena here in the Dashang building. People often come here to participate in gambling fights. Many of them are big and wealthy guests who throw money away. Jack is the ace host and referee of the fighting arena. He might also be one of the bosses behind the scenes." Underground fighting? Cragburst's interest was immediately piqued when he heard the word fighting. How come I've never heard of this before? I've been to practically all the fighting arenas in Xia City, public, private, legal and illegal. It's probably because this place is reserved for minors. The periphery of the Dashang building's isolation zone was just as Cragburst said. It was dirty, messy and crisscrossed with dark tunnels. Luo Nan was able to obtain a lot of useful information from the mouths of the gang members. In addition to the panoramic image support of his mental senses, Luo Nan was able to move more smoothly and freely than the gangs entrenched here. Cragburst originally had a belly full of anger because he was unsuccessful in his pursuit of Jack. He wanted to vent. But he never expected that Luo Nan would just cheat and open the map the moment he arrived. He only saw the shadows of the gang members chasing and weaving their way in and out, but he could only eat the dust from behind. The number of people he actually met was few and far between. It was hard for him to put his strength to use. He wasn't an idiot. Naturally, he could feel that Luo Nan wasn't just using the crow to scout. Instead, Luo Nan had a higher level of perception at play. "Good boy. There's something wrong with your ability. In terms of range, even cat eyes isn't this abnormal?" Cat eyes. Luo Nan was quite interested in this unruly woman who suddenly appeared in his own pyramid. Since the intensity of their advance wasn't that great, he just asked casually, "What's the range of her long-range perception?" Her all-encompassing perception ranges from 50 to 70 meters. Her psychic perception has a limit of 3,720 kilometers when she's in a good state. How much? Luo Nan nearly choked awake. "Are you talking about kilometers or meters?" "It's kilometers without a doubt." Cragburst laughed out loud. "It's inconceivable, right? But this is the terrifying aspect of long-range perception. As long as the feeling comes, there's no reasoning with you. Back in the day, Cat Eyes did one of the most amazing things. She used her extrasensory psychic perception to guide a million-ton nuclear-penetrating warhead. It smashed directly into the underground lair of the mutant species in the wilderness. It was a standard hit to the soul. A bunch of arrogant big shots from the military all knelt before her. Luonan didn't know what to say for a time. He had been proud of the range of his soul-body senses before, but he immediately encountered a standard that he could only look up to. But when he thought about it again, such an amazing person had actually entered his pyramid without a trace. She was more or less affected and suppressed by him. The feeling was quite subtle. Cragburst concluded, in a certain sense, Cat Eyes' ability should be the closest type to that of a psychic, but it isn't that mysterious. Aside from being unstable and being powerless against the Darksider species, she practically doesn't have any other flaws. So by all means don't offend her. Otherwise she can find you in any corner of the city. She can take advantage of the time when you're in a dream. Crack. Cragburst made a motion of twisting Ink's neck and laughed loudly. He reached back to pinch Ink's head. You really need to be careful. I felt that you and her seemed to be innately incompatible that day. There's no way out? Chapter 108. The other side of the wall is the quarantine area. There's also an underground fighting arena. Cragburst couldn't see anything other than the white wall. But Luonan was different. His soul body had already passed through the wall. He had gone in and out of the building countless times. He was probably more clear about the layout inside than the designer. He combined the information he obtained earlier and explained to Cragburst. Originally, the quarantine area didn't allow for any other arrangements aside from surveillance and defense systems. But the management of the building made modifications in order to ensure the size of the area and the viewing effect. They occupied a portion of the surrounding area. This formed a fuzzy zone. The gangs of the recycling stratum can interact with the gamblers of the upper world. One side pays in money and the other side pays in manpower. Jack is one of the true controllers of this fuzzy zone. This is his lair and his cornucopia. Cragburst didn't ask for more details. As a man who frequently entered and exited the underground fighting arena, he was even more clear than Luonan about the inside of the building. The management of the building should be the house of bankers. Only through this place could one transform incorporeal credit into tangible wealth in the current society of credit and authority. But he didn't care about this at all. He was only interested in how to capture Jack. Jack is in the fighting arena, right? How do we get in? Do we smash a passageway out? Cragburst was a bit eager to give it a try. This is a passageway. It's used for emergency evacuation. The design is that it can only be opened from the inside. Luonan let Ink flap its wings to wake up this bro whose brain was filled with violence. The problem was that it was completely ineffective. Roar roar. Let's be a bit more direct. Watch me. No. Wait a few more seconds. Luonan's voice had yet to fall when the white wall in front of him slid to one side. The inner layer of steel plates slid in the opposite direction. Only then did the ice-cold metal wall appear. But this wall also split open from the middle, revealing a dimly lit passageway. 3 layers of protection, especially the last layer that was 10 centimeters thick, made Cragburst speechless for a time. He didn't bring up using violence to open a passageway again. As for the passageway in front of them, it wasn't too long. One could see to the end with a glance. The door on the other side was half open. An even more intense light seeped in. There was also clamorous noise coming in. Clearly, the outside was a certain location of the underground fighting arena. Cragburst first looked at his feet. There was a person sitting down in the passageway. The person was already unconscious. He turned his head and looked around. Soon he found that there was a password plate on top of the man's head. The corresponding screen showed that the password plate had been successfully opened. You're a mole? Cragburst quickly corrected this preposterous thought, but the following conjecture was even more preposterous to him. Don't tell me that you controlled this guy through the wall and made him open the door? Bullseye. Speaking of which, the effects of hypnosis combined with the human-faced arachnid's fishing technique were quite decent. Luonan just chuckled through the hexaear, maintaining a bit of a sense of mystery. He indicated to Cragburst to close this emergency passageway. This place was certainly connected to the control room. Though they couldn't hide it for too long, they could hide it for as long as they could. What the hell, this isn't just spirit attachment, it's some kind of ability enhancement. Actually, you can let the crow have some of your abilities, right? Do you have wizard blood? Or do you come from some secret order? Cragburst's thoughts were getting more and more outrageous. Luonan was really worried that the words, "his soul is in an out-of-body state," would come out of Cragburst's mouth. Luonan could only interrupt Cragburst once more. "Let's speed things up. It's very likely that Jack is only using this place as a transit point. The isolated area can't enter the business district of Dashang Building, but there's a direct passageway to the upper city district." Cragburst immediately shut his mouth. He simply cleaned up the scene and passed through the passageway. There was a circular hallway outside. The curvature was extremely obvious, making people feel that the space was indeed limited. The operator of this place had indeed made use of the space to the extreme. On the concave side of the wall, there was a curved wall projection every now and then. On it, there was an exciting scene in the arena. Sure enough, they're all kids. Cragburst's brows furrowed. He was a professional, so he felt vexed by the various scenes displayed on the screen. They have a certain amount of fighting techniques, but they're all competing in the dark and ruthless. They're trying to kill people. Many of the scenes of being knocked down on the screen had broken hands and feet, or they had been struck in a vital spot. Cragburst wouldn't even blink an eye at these things in the adult fighting world. But the two combatants on the screen didn't look to be older than 15, which was the same age as Luonan. They were a group of half-grown kids. They didn't hold back in the slightest. Did they really know what this represented? Many of them knew, judging by the ominous glint in their eyes. And the feeling brought about by this sort of warped thinking made people feel even more uncomfortable. The sound of footsteps came from both sides of the hallway at this time. Cragburst's intentions were to just go up and be done with it. But Luonan indicated for Cragburst to go to the other side, to a room with a thick curtain covering the door. Cragburst thought that this was the passageway to the fighting arena, but he discovered that it seemed to be a lounge after entering. The layout was very simple and crude. There were only wardrobes and benches. The passageway to the fighting arena was further inside. There was already a person in the lounge right now. He wore combat shorts and his upper body was bare. He didn't wear shoes and a towel was draped over his head. His face was drooping. It seemed that he was conserving his energy. He should be the next competitor to take the stage. He didn't have a coach or a friend by his side. He was all by himself. His entire body was cold and gloomy. He actually didn't react at all to Cragburst, the big guy who had suddenly barged in. Cragburst was a bit stupefied. Then he discovered that the room was actually very noisy. There was a display screen in the lounge as well, but it was a bit smaller than the one outside. The sound from the display screen was quite loud. It made people wonder what use this lounge could serve. The display screen just so happened to jump to a new scene at this time. "Look, Jack." Luonan reminded Cragburst to pay attention. The two's minds shook, but they soon discovered that this was just a video clip. Jack was wearing a referee uniform at the time. He wore a bow tie. His body was ramrod straight and he had a sense of propriety. Aside from the unsightly scars on his face, he looked more like a noble steward than a referee. It was no wonder that his hosting and refereeing were so popular. This match isn't bad. Cragburst used a professional gaze to evaluate the tall and skinny one. His foundation is very solid. He has a sense of propriety in his attacks. He's a very good control-type competitor. Hold on. There's something wrong with the editing. The editor had chosen this shot to be the scene of the tall and skinny kid slowing down, dodging, and circling around, which Cragburst had praised. It was completely different from the intense fighting scene before. Such camera language should be hinting at something. Luonan discovered that the competitor, who had his head lowered all this time, had raised his head to stare at the display screen. His thin and pale face was revealed beneath the towel. He was unexpectedly calm and he continued to ignore Cragburst to the side. Chapter 109. The focus of the human-faced arachnid's attention was on the quiet and silent competitor. This person's age was about the same as Luonan's. His reserved and gloomy nature was about the same. However, the reason for the human-faced arachnid's attention was certainly not because of this. The feedback Luonan received was mostly anticipation and hunger. He was like a glutton, staring fixedly at a dish that was gradually cooking on the stove. He felt it was a pity to eat it, but he was impatient to not eat it. "This is the new food you've chosen?" Luonan had just been pondering over the changes in the human-faced arachnid's diet. Now he had a true reference. He couldn't help but spend a bit of energy to pay attention, but how could he understand it in a short period of time? And at this moment the camera turned. The strangely edited match ended, and there was even a post-match scene next. The two competitors stood in the center of the fighting stage and Jack stood between them. It seemed that it was time to announce the victor. From the previous clips, the lanky kid's advantage was extremely clear, even though he had inexplicably less clips. He displayed an astonishing level of control. However, Jack wasn't in a hurry to announce the victor. He lowered his head to look at his watch. At this moment, the background music of the edited scene strangely stopped. This caused the sharp whistles and whistles from all four sides of the stands to grow louder, more clamorous, and more deafening. Finally, Jack made a move. He spread his arms, but he didn't act like a normal referee, grabbing the competitor's hand. Instead, he wrapped his arms around the shoulders of the two teenagers. It looked extremely intimate. But at this moment, the children's bodies went rigid. Jack wasn't in a hurry to announce the victor. Instead, he spoke like he was reciting a poem. His voice passed through a miniature microphone and spread throughout the entire arena. As the referee, I must judge fairly. This is a conservative fight. The screams from the stands suddenly rose to a whole new level. A fight that has gone beyond time. The screams and cheers grew louder and louder. Some people even stood up and waved their arms towards the fighting stage. This spurred on even more people. Soon, no one was sitting in the entire fighting arena. Jack's expression didn't change as he spat out his final judgment. A fake fight. The people in the stands went completely crazy. The chaotic clamor had already converged into a simple yet heart-sinking sound. Kill, kill, kill. On the fighting stage, the faces of the two teenagers were deathly pale. They wanted to struggle, but they were firmly clamped down by Jack's iron arms. Jack said with a smile, "There are no losers and there are no winners." Before he finished his sentence, Jack exerted force in both of his arms. The crisp sound of bones breaking was transmitted to the entire audience through the microphone on his body. The shoulder bones of the two youths instantly fell apart. A powerful force closed them up, crushing their sternum and spines. Then, the two youths who were no longer human were forcibly hugged in front of Jack's chest, causing them to hug each other. A pair of faces that were bleeding from all 7 orifices collided with each other, and then softened into 2 piles of dead flesh. Jack relaxed his arms and the 2 corpses slid down. Without even looking, he crossed his arms and waved. Team ending friendly match. Pass. *CK. Without waiting for the next scene to change, the display suddenly caved in and cracked. Cragburst's fist had directly smashed it apart. Such an intense reaction thoroughly exposed Cragburst's position. But how could he care? He spat again, a bunch of dregs. The quiet contestant turned his face. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes, but this emotion was extinguished before it could reach his face. In the end, he simply spat out 2 words. "You guys?" Cragburst stared at him with wide eyes. "Kid, you want to participate in this bullshit fight? I'm the next one." Cragburst waved his hand roughly. "Fuck the next one. Since I'm here, there will never be a next one. That way leads to the fighting arena, right?" Cragburst was about to step out as he spoke. Not only was his sense of justice bursting, but the things that happened in this fighting arena made him, a fighting enthusiast, feel disgusted. Luo Nan helplessly called for Cragburst to stop when he saw that Cragburst was about to smash the fighting arena to pieces. This was already completely out of line with their original intentions, okay? I'm willing to bet that as soon as you enter the arena, Jack will immediately disappear without a trace. Even if you knock over everyone in the arena, what's the point of letting this murderer escape? That's the problem with your scouting. Why haven't you found that black-skinned rat yet? Cragburst made the same mistake as Luo Nan in his excitement. He forgot that he was communicating through the psychic wave network and directly spoke. The quiet competitor saw that Cragburst was talking to the air. His eyes streaked across the air and didn't see anything else. In the end, his eyes stopped on the crow on Cragburst's shoulder. He opened his mouth, a little hesitant, but finally said, "Sir, are you talking to the crows?" Cragburst stared blankly for a moment. He turned his head to look and said, baffled, yeah. Cragburst regretted it as soon as the words left his mouth. Such a reply was too stupid. But at that moment, the quiet contestant, who had been expressionless all this while, actually smiled. "So it's Mr. Crow. Can I talk to him too?" A slightly shaky smile and surprisingly childish words blossomed in the narrow lounge. It was also at this time that Cragburst and Luo Nan truly and clearly realized that this fighter, who was about to walk onto the fighting stage and receive fatal adjudication, was truly just a half-grown child. At the same time, The deathly still eyes of the 15 or 16-year-old boy in front of him flashed slightly. His entire body's life force and spiritual energy rippled out from his long and narrow eyes. Cragburst didn't know what to say when faced with such a face. In the end, he could only shrug his shoulders. Fine. If he's willing. Borrowing the force of Cragburst's shrug, ink flew and jumped, landing directly on the arm of the quiet contestant. Of course, this was under Luo Nan's indication. The quiet contestant was delighted by Ink's intelligence. Then he slightly straightened up and bowed very solemnly toward Ink. My name is Ruewen. They call me Marauder, but I'm nothing more than a crow. This is my 100th match and it's also my last match. I hope that Mr. Crow can give me his blessings. This time there were a few more words. Luo Nan discovered that the quiet contestant was called Ruewen, right? His voice was quite special. It seemed that his voice hadn't gone through puberty yet. There was a bit of sharpness within the hoarseness, and there was a natural resonance of breath. It was very unique. It made people feel that if he were to sing he would be quite good. That? Cragburst didn't quite understand. He tried to interrupt but was stopped by Luo Nan. This sort of feeling was far too familiar. The current Ruewen was the same as Luo Nan many times. He was completely trapped in his own circle, forming his own logic. There was no need to forcefully break it. Perhaps this was the chance for him to relax the most. It was the moment he treasured the most. And at this time, the human-faced arachnid began to stir. Within the eyes of this newly promoted glutton, there was a bright seed rising from the dark and desolate abyss. Even though the seed was bound and surrounded by the filthy and turbid streams, it was pure and untainted. It was pure and transparent. Chapter 110. Luo Nan's senses were synchronized with the human-faced arachnids. The human-faced arachnid was paying intense attention to Luo Nan. Such a strong stimulation also made some of the muddled information clear. Sure enough, the human-faced arachnid no longer treated the turbid flow of emotions as food after leaping from a plankton to a fish. What it was truly interested in right now was the spiritual seed that undulated up and down within the turbid flow. In reality, it was something that lived within the turbid flow of emotions, yet it was completely different from the turbid flow. It was something that possessed more vitality. It wasn't easy to form such a spiritual seed. One must have the mental cultivation to overcome filthy emotions and desires, as well as a basic positive attitude in order to finally take shape. Just like Ruewen, he had only been in embryonic form a long time ago. It wasn't until he spoke to Mr. Crow that he broke free from his deathly still and cold state of mind. Only then did this spiritual seed finally sublimate and leap to a new level. Cragburst actually had a similar spiritual seed as well, but it was hidden deep within his powerful magma-like life force. It wasn't as pure and transparent as Ruewen's. From the perspective of the human-faced arachnid, the spiritual seed was an incomparable delicacy. Swallowing this spiritual seed was both a form of eating and evolution. Its evolution method was very lethal. It basically used the vitality and spirituality of others as nourishment. Its path of evolution was built on the foundation of destroying the hopes of others. Without a doubt, the human-faced arachnid was an existence that was evil to the extreme. Even if Luo Nan relied on its strength to a large degree, he would not deny this point. Although he did not deny it, it did not mean that he would allow it. Otherwise, what was the difference between it and the human-faced arachnid? Luo Nan's complete control over the human-faced arachnid was displayed without restraint. No matter how intense the human-faced arachnid's desire to eat was, the heavily chained crow shook, and it had to be well behaved. At this moment, someone walked in from the passageway that led to the fighting arena. The moment the door opened, the noise from the fighting arena almost overwhelmed the small resting room. Fortunately, it was quickly isolated again. That person said loudly, Ruewen, get ready to go on stage. The incomparable 100th match. Who are you? Your grandfather. Cragburst revealed an evil grin towards that person. Before that person could cry out in shock, Cragburst slapped him unconscious to the ground. Ruewen turned a blind eye to this. He was already completely immersed in his own world. He stood up and gently swung his arms up and down. Well, Mr. Crow, here comes my last battle. You won't be stingy with your blessings, right? Swish. Perhaps it was because Ink was quite satisfied from being swayed, but Ink had already opened its mouth before Luo Nan could speak. Its hoarse voice was unpleasant to hear, but it made Ruewen smile once more. He crossed his arms and walked over to Cragburst's side. He returned the ink. Thank you, sir. You and Mr. Crow's arrival is my fortune. Ahem, nothing. With Cragburst's straightforward temperament, he really wasn't suited to dealing with a reserved and autistic person like Ruei-Wen. The logic of both sides was not on the same line. Luckily, Luonan extended a helping hand at this time. He gave Cragburst some advice, allowing Cragburst to ask for information, even though his words were very clumsy. You just said 100 matches. Is there any special meaning to it? After 100 matches, I can choose to walk the path of judgment and leave the arena. It's all tricks and they've been used too much. Cragburst had seen similar situations far too many times in other underground arenas. Are there challenges on the road of adjudication? Of course. Who made it out in the past? Since the establishment of the fighting arena, the ones closest to 100 victories have been me and my brother. Alright. I thank you for your praise before on behalf of him. Luonan and Cragburst thought of the skinny and tall youth who died under Jack's iron arm at the same time. Cragburst smashed his fist against his palm. Isn't the truth quite clear? What bullshit road of adjudication? This fighting arena never thought of letting you guys leave alive. The truth was indeed quite clear. This fighting arena was jointly established by a group of rich people and gangs of the recycling stratum. Contestants like Ruei-Wen were mostly poor orphans of the recycling stratum. They were controlled by gangs and underwent harsh training to fight each other to the death for the amusement of the rich. Cragburst hoped that Ruei-Wen could clarify the truth. Leave? That's just a gimmick. A gimmick, nothing more. But Ruei-Wen didn't respond. She just tore off the towel on top of her head, revealing her refreshing jet-black short hair. The contours of her face were actually quite delicate and pretty. Her delicate and pretty appearance was a bit out of place in this cruel beating arena. Cragburst was still persuading her. Hey, just join us. I'll take you to kill our way out. Ruei-Wen walked forward in silence. Cragburst extended his hand in an attempt to grab her, but Ruei-Wen didn't even turn her head. Only a cold and clear voice transmitted over, I'm going to kill our way out. I'm going to do it the way my brother and I did. Cragburst froze and stopped. Ruei-Wen pushed open the soundproof door and walked out with large strides. DJ's resounding voice transmitted over, this is an unprecedented 100-victory battle. Our wing of death, the undefeated plunderer Ruei-Wen. Cheers could be heard from the arena. Amidst the chaotic and distorted roars, there was a strange voice mixed with it. Male and female monsters. Flat-chested witches. Take it off completely. Verify her identity. Cragburst couldn't catch his breath properly. He choked and nearly caused ink to go askew. Luonan's soul body nearly lost its grip on the chain and let the human-faced arachnid charge out. A woman? I couldn't tell at all. Cragburst was stupefied in place. Who would have thought? Ruei-Wen's upper body was bared from start to finish. Her attitude was natural, and she didn't have any obvious secondary sexual characteristics. Even if she did, it would be submerged under the lines of her thin and hard muscles. Luonan was a bit embarrassed as well, but this awkward thought was forcibly severed when Ruei-Wen stepped onto the fighting stage and exposed her thin body to the gazes of thousands of people. Cragburst held open the soundproof door that was about to close, so that the clamor of the fighting arena could be heard in an unending stream. Oh, I'll grant you the path to leave. Bye. Let's start the auction today. I want to taste the taste of the flat-chested witch. Cheers, clamor, and whistles rang out without end. Several hundred rich and powerful people, who were likely to make a name for themselves in various fields, used the body and life of this little girl to obtain stimulation that couldn't be obtained on the level of normal society. And Ruei-Wen? The turbid flow of filth surged up from all directions. But that pure spiritual seed remained untainted by even a speck of dust. This girl, whose gender was hard to distinguish, had already been completely shielded from the influence of the filth of the outside world. But no matter what, why was such a girl placed in such a filthy place? Cragburst didn't make a sound as he walked forward with large strides. Luonan was a bit unable to restrain himself. He actually didn't stop Cragburst when he walked forward. Cragburst walked out of the passageway. It was reasonable to say that his large and unfamiliar face was the type that would attract a lot of attention. But right now, the vast majority of the people in the fighting arena had their attention focused on the fighting stage. They didn't notice Cragburst at all. But Ruei-Wen, who was on the fighting stage, turned her head without any warning. Her cold and clear gaze made Cragburst halt once more. He wanted to advance, but he couldn't. Chapter 111. Ruewen quickly straightened her body and calmly stood in the center of the boxing ring. Her head was slightly drooped, allowing the rich and powerful people in the stands to wantonly size her up and evaluate her body. They constantly raised the stakes in the gambling house, causing the atmosphere to heat up even more. Cragburst's mouth didn't stop cursing the moment she walked through the tunnel. He turned his head to look at the spectator stands in all four directions. He just wanted to find someone he didn't like and give them a fierce beating. The problem was there wasn't a single person in the entire arena that he didn't want to beat up. Has Jack been found yet? Cragburst paid special attention to the referee of this match. Unfortunately, it wasn't Jack. This made him even more vexed. Luonan didn't respond. Right now his mental senses had already covered the entire fighting arena. With this as the center, it covered a vast area with a radius of over 500 meters. It was equal to encompassing the greater half of the Dashang building within it. Even though the sensing range was slightly reduced due to the differences in the building materials and the interference of the radio waves, and the precision was still on the millimeter level, it was not a reason why Jack could not be captured. The modified human seemed to have completely evaporated. At this time Ruewen's opponent was already on stage. Ignoring the string of meaningless titles, it was a stout and robust man who looked no less than 2 or 3 times bigger than Ruewen. He didn't look like a 15 or 16-year-old child at all. However, the spectators in the stands were already used to it. They cheered and egged the contestant on as well. "Dope boy. Come on, powder keg, it's time to explode." They're going to do it on stage. They're so compatible. Luonan's attention was drawn back. He was a complete layman in the field of fighting. He only had a vague concept of heavyweight and the like. He couldn't help but worry for Ruewen when he saw the eye-catching contrast of body shapes in the boxing ring. Cragburst was quite disdainful of the fat man, a fellow who uses drugs to stimulate his maturation. If he continues like this, he won't even need to go on stage. His own weight will crush his bones. But it had to be said that this sort of thing like drug stimulation was very common in the underground fighting arenas. Ruewen might have also taken some sort of drug to suppress the development of her secondary sexual characteristics. Otherwise, as a girl with an innately deficient physique, it would have been very difficult for her to obtain 100 victories. When all was said and done, Cragburst and Luonan had no idea what was going on. In the end, Cragburst could only comfort him. "I'm here. Even if something unexpected happens, I can save him." Ink spread its wings and slapped Cragburst's face. This fellow didn't know how to talk. "Do we need you to save them?" The crux of the problem was that Ruewen's current mental state and state were inconceivably clear and bright. But once she was destroyed by an external force, the damage to her mind would be extremely frightening. It would be much more troublesome than a pure physical injury. Luonan had just analyzed this point from the human-faced arachnid, but he was unable to explain it to Cragburst. He felt stifled to the extreme. The exchange between the two was meaningless, but the development of the fight on the boxing stage caught everyone off guard. After a full 20 minutes of prelude, atmosphere and bets, the battle began. Faced with an opponent who was at least twice as heavy as her, Ruewen didn't retreat, but instead advanced. She rushed in from the front, and before Gunpowder Barrel's thick arms could close in, she had already broken his tibia with a single kick. Just as Gunpowder Barrel's fingers touched Ruewen's shoulder, he lost his balance and fell to the ground in pain. Ruewen easily broke away from his grasp, and took the opportunity to kick him in the head, sending him into an unconscious state. The battle ended just like that. The originally heaven-flipping scene turned cold and silent in an instant. The vast majority of people, including the wealthy guests who won their bets, were unable to accept such a simple and laughable ending. They sunk into an awkward silence. Originally, the wagered fight was just a pastime. What they truly wanted to see was the cruel and bloody scene of fists hitting flesh. Cragburst's wild laughter and his celebratory action of raising his arms and brandishing his fists were exceptionally eye-catching under this bizarre atmosphere. Even the cameras that covered the entire arena gave him a close-up. Luonan wanted Ink to smack Cragburst's head. If this wasn't exposure, then what was? On the boxing stage, the referee was stupefied for a few seconds before going forward to examine the injury. This was just a formality. His true intention was to use this opportunity to get in contact with the person in charge and figure out what to do next. However, the big boss of the fighting arena, Jack, was unable to be contacted from beginning to end. In the end, it was the supervisor who spoke up and let the referee smooth things over first. The referee helplessly got up and grabbed Ruewen's hand, preparing to announce the victor. But Ruewen pushed his hand away. Then she borrowed the help of the referee's miniature microphone to say a few simple words. "I choose the road of adjudication." It was as if a bomb had been forcefully shoved into the oppressive and awkward atmosphere of the fighting arena with these words. First came the low clamor of several hundred people. Then came the sounds of cheering, laughing, cursing, and whistling. They flooded the entire fighting arena. The atmosphere exploded in an instant, wishing it could flip over the entire Dashang building. Aha! Challenger. Traitor. The flat-chested witch's counterattack. Stupid woman. Has your brain turned into muscle? Go die. Just tear her to shreds. No. Break her 4 limbs. Knock out her teeth. I want it. I want it. The several hundred rich and powerful spectators had personally drawn up the rules. They had designed a seemingly magnanimous path of escape. But when this rule was finally challenged, not many people could remain calm. The so-called magnanimity was just a symbolic footnote they made for their lofty status. Touching it was an offense. So in the end, all the emotions converged together to transform into a uniform howl. Adjudication. 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 The referee also returned to his senses from the unexpected change. He actually felt that he had been saved. A laughable battle that had been doused in cold water had suddenly turned into a large bomb that ignited everyone's emotions. Good. At this time, the projectors all over the fighting arena had already taken advantage of the opportunity to broadcast information related to the road of adjudication. Various images flashed in succession, listing the 3 deathly steps of King of Fists, Beast King Battle, and Adjudication Battle. The first 2 stages, as their names implied, were fights with true adult fighters and wild and untamed beasts. Only then was it the 3rd stage. The projector timely displayed the image of a calm and callous white man wearing a referee uniform. Adjudicator Jack. The gang leader here, the gold medal host, the referee, and the murderer who had killed Rue Wen's brother, was precisely the boss of the final stage. Each projector also timely displayed the scene of many contestants, including Rue Wen's brother, dying at the hands of this callous referee. The fighting arena emitted a sharp whistling sound with each life disappearing until it finally stopped at the scene of Jack waving his hands and denying everything. The entire fighting arena was about to boil over. Chapter 112. Luo Nan's soul body stood towering amidst this wanton and rushing torrent of emotions. Originally, he should have been angry, but from his unique perspective he saw Rue Wen, who continued to stand silently on the fighting stage after her words. He also saw her spiritual seed that was submerged in the turbid flow, yet remained untainted from beginning to end by a speck of dust. A wondrous calm arrived. Just like this, Luo Nan looked down from high above, coldly looking down at the several hundred warped faces. His mental senses were like a large net that didn't let anything through. It covered every nook and cranny within a 500-meter radius. At the same time, it included the emotional movements of every single person. The vast majority of people were fanatical, but there were some people who were a bit special. For example, this person was a bit impatient. Luo Nan's attention naturally shifted. This was a certain VIP room in the upper part of the fighting arena. A man dressed in a suit and leather shoes was pacing endlessly in the room shouting, Jack. Damn it. I know you heard me." The high-priority communicator crackled with static extremely clearly. A voice transmitted back approximately 2 seconds later, "What's up?" "Found it." Luo Nan instantly focused his attention, increasing his precision in all aspects. He felt that it wasn't enough, so he simply shifted his soul body over. He was in the VIP room, sticking to the back of the contact's neck to receive the message from the communicator. The contact was excited to finally get in touch with that damn Jack. He never would have thought that there was a spirit behind him that was receiving the message at the same time as him. In fact, the information Luo Nan received far exceeded that of the contact. After increasing his precision, Luo Nan was able to see not only the tangible substance, but he was also able to capture the interweaving electrical waves in the air. It was impossible for Luo Nan to know the information transmitted by the electrical waves due to his lack of the ability to transform and analyze. However, he was able to refer to the continuous interweaving and spreading fluctuations within the communicator to determine the approximate direction. This was his first attempt, but it wasn't easy to realize a tracking in the information society where countless electrical waves interweaved and covered. Fortunately, the contact and Jack continued to communicate. The contact explained to Jack in as much detail as he could. During this time, the buzzing noise of interference continued to ring. The quality of the call was extremely bad. In the end, the contact didn't even know what he said. "Damn it, Jack. Where the hell are you?" "On the road to heaven." Jack sounded like he was doing some sort of exercise. His voice was a bit breathless. "Now isn't the time for jokes. You must come back. Immediately." "I was just about to touch heaven. To hell with heaven. Ruewen wants to charge through the path of adjudication." "Was Ruewen? Didn't you say that any news related to this woman must be reported to you immediately?" There was a sudden silence on the other side. After a full 5 seconds, Jack finally replied, "Who was in the first 2 stages?" The contact was overjoyed to see that Jack finally understood the seriousness of the matter. He quickly continued to report the latest situation. "The first obstacle is Derong, our chief combat coach. This pass is meaningless. Next stage." "But, oh my god." The tycoons in the fighting arena all screamed like they'd gone mad. This was because Ruewen had paid the price of bruising her wrist just a second ago. She'd made another terrifying close-quarters assault. Her knee had fiercely smashed into Rongda's crotch. This robust man's physique wasn't inferior to Kragburst's as he bent over in pain. Her elbow smashed into his throat, smashing his entire Adam's apple into mush. The fractured bones were displaced and she cut open his carotid artery. Asphyxiation and arterial bleeding caused the strong man to fall to the ground, twitching as he quickly walked towards death. Ruewen gazed at the dying man on the ground and said softly, "For the 70% eliminated." The contact was already stupefied from watching. He couldn't bear this kind of loss any longer. Rongda was once the champion of the Underground Fighting Alliance. She must have concealed her strength. What the hell is going on here? Who taught her? Damn it, damn it, damn it. Jack already understood everything from the contact's reaction. He issued orders with a hoarse voice, "Raise the protective walls on all fronts right now. Isolate the fighting arena. Tell that group of trash that we need a certain amount of time to prepare for the Beast King battle." "Prepare for what?" "You go contact Mr. Ma. Tell him that the high-quality life and death duel he's been dreaming of has arrived. We'll send out the 100 victory which Ruewen. He only needs to bring his family's little darling over. I'll give him 10 minutes of time." "Oh, Mr. Ma's collection. Jack, you're really too evil." The contact came to a sudden realization. He greatly praised Jack's way of thinking. He immediately hung up and hastily went to find someone. Ruewen. Forget it. I'll just go with her cheap older brother." Jack removed his wristband and casually tossed it to the side. "Don't anyone disturb me again." He was suddenly startled before his voice fell. He slowly raised his head. His undamaged right eye and the mechanical electronic eye focused at the same time. They stared at the empty space in front of them. He finally found it. Luonan's soul body appeared in this room. He also noticed Jack's reaction, but right now he was even more shocked at Jack's current location. Jack was still inside the Deshang building, but he was on the top floor of the building, the 141st floor. This landmark building of the River Wu district had a height of around 600 meters. The 141st floor was over 550 meters in height. It just so happened to exceed the range of Luonan's all-encompassing perception. Originally, Luonan didn't believe that Jack would leave his usual lair and enter the privileged society that was absolutely unfriendly to gangsters like them. But the facts proved that his judgment was wrong. Not only did Jack enter, but he also arrived at the top floor of the Deshang building, which required extremely high credit privileges. He even had an independent training room here. At this moment, Jack was sitting in the middle of a pitch-black device whose purpose could not be seen. His body was connected to many wires, and powerful electric currents were piercing his body at every moment. Some of them even pulled out beautiful blue electric currents in the air. Is it charging the altered human right now? Jack's eyes were constantly changing focus. The end of the air was a wall. But before the wall, there was a reaction that made him vigilant. It appeared without end. A special scanner was installed in his body. The naked eye and the electronic eye received light waves of all frequencies and compared them with the surrounding environment. The data was calculated and processed to form an image. In the end, what appeared on his optic nervous system was an image that was as fuzzy as a shadow. He paused for a moment before speaking in a hoarse voice. "Ability user? Soul configuration?" Luonan was truly shocked. The electromagnetic gun attack on the recycling stratum really wasn't a coincidence. This Jack seemed to have some sort of method that could capture the existence of a soul body. His soul body floated a few times in the room. He discovered that although Jack's gaze was a bit sluggish, it was always able to rapidly change. This was a situation that had never happened before. Chapter 113. In the end, Jack was the first to break the silence. He stared at the empty space and said in a low voice, "I don't know who you are, and I don't know which force you belong to, but I can confirm that there was no enmity between us before today. I admire your ability and I don't want to be your enemy. If you're unhappy with today's conflict, I'm willing to make amends. Whatever you want, I will do my best to satisfy you within my capabilities." The only response he got was the buzzing sound of the electric current. Jack paused for a moment before continuing, "Your soul configuration has yet to reach the level where your mind can interfere with matter. My nervous system has been modified and your influence on me is negligible. Yes, there's also that big guy. He's a very headache-inducing opponent. Perhaps he's currently rushing over, but inside the Dashang building, I'll make his pace slow like a turtle. If we can't come to an agreement, we'll just have to drag it out, maybe until tomorrow morning?" Luonan still did not respond. There was no way to respond even if he wanted to. Jack was right about one thing. At present he only had two means of communication. One was the psychic wave network, and the other was the local network of the format pyramid. Neither of them were useful to Jack. It was as if Jack's consciousness was hidden under a thick layer of ice water. He could reach it, but he had used up too much of his strength halfway through. It was almost nothing. Luonan didn't know how Jack did it. He simply blocked out Jack's voice and scanned the entire room in an attempt to discover more information. Of course, the most eye-catching thing in this training room was the pitch-black machine outside of Jack's body. With Luonan's meager knowledge of machinery, it was very hard for him to understand the ultimate purpose of the machine. And from the surface, it looked like the machine was just an unending stream of electricity being poured into Jack's body. Luonan paid attention to the voltage indicator. Any normal person would have turned into charcoal by now, but Jack seemed to be enjoying it. It could be seen that the electric current instilled by the black machine had truly cut into every part of Jack's body. Jack's muscles were twitching and trembling every second, but within this twitching and trembling, there was clearly a relatively stable rhythm. This meant that Jack had retained some control over his body. What did he just say? On the way to heaven, it was clear that such an electric infusion was beneficial to Jack. Oh, in that case, Jack continued to chatter endlessly while Luonan was gathering information. "I get it. You can't open your mouth, right? The research on soul configuration on Earth is still very backward, or are you just a talented person who got lucky? Very well then. I can probably guess what you are more interested in. Intelligence, information, all kinds of knowledge that can broaden your horizons. For example, right now, I can tell you that you can use the special waveband of your soul configuration to communicate with me. This is because my body has been implanted with the corresponding transceiver. Even if I haven't used it for 2 to 3 years, it shouldn't be damaged. We can try it now. You just need to focus your mind. You have the talent to form a soul configuration, so it should be easy for you to do this." The void was silent for about 5 seconds. Then Jack smiled. The psychic waves from the outside world were converted into recognizable information through the transceiver in his body, ringing in his ears. "I can now believe that you are indeed not from the military. If the military possessed a similar transformation project, then they wouldn't be in such a difficult situation when facing the dark side or life forms." Jack maintained his smile, making the scar on his face look less sinister. "Of course, there is a certain difference between soul configuration and dark side or life forms. We can talk about it in detail later. You really do know a lot." Luonan expressed his admiration for Jack's ability to bring up new information at any moment. "That's why I'm a very good information peddler." Jack continued to speak with fervor and assurance. "What do we talk about? All right, let's talk about why we became enemies. I think you will certainly be interested in that pretty boy Yen Yongbua. Now that you mention it, I find that I know too much." Luonan sneered. Yes, this fellow buried countless hooks in his words. What Earth, soul configuration, psychic wave transceiver? But in reality, there was practically no valuable information that he revealed. So a second later, Luonan directly said, "Let's talk about that metal beetle." The smile on Jack's lips widened. "Friend, you must be quite young. You must know that communication shouldn't be done in a fit of pique. You should think of ways to embarrass the other party. I know that you must be more interested in Yen Yongbua. Otherwise, you wouldn't have followed him. Let me think. What is his explosive point? For example, quantum corporation? Archetype format? The world's first burner? Or perhaps, Deep Blue World? You must be a master storyteller. Luo Nan used psychic waves to send a mocking message, but he had no choice but to admit that the titles that Jack mentioned had nearly caused his curiosity to explode. It was as if he had bumped into a moving database of information. This fellow Jack was absolutely not a simple gang leader. His experiences, knowledge, and even the level of contact he had had with him far exceeded Luo Nan's previous estimations. However, let's just leave it at that for now. Jack's smile continued to persist, but a short second later, astonishment and explosive rage tore apart this layer of mask, arriving together with the darkness that enveloped the room. A power outage. The low humming of the pitch-black machine gradually came to a stop. The power outage protection was done quite well. The muscles on Jack's body only twitched a bit before returning to normal. But his mood couldn't return. Damn it! What did you do? Jack roared in the darkness. He did his best to shake his arms, but this didn't give him a sliver of electricity. It's as you can see. The power is out. Luo Nan used the method that Jack taught him to maintain communication. Jack's choice of the top floor of the Deshang building as a hiding place was indeed an unimaginably brilliant move. However, as a business district with people coming and going, there were uncontrollable factors. To put it more bluntly, there were far too many human factors. Hypnosis combined with the human-faced arachnid's fishing technique was truly too useful. Luo Nan just spent a bit of time while Jack chattered on endlessly. He chose a property manager and cut off the power supply to this floor. During this time he discovered that Jack's training room used a dedicated power supply line. But this point was meaningless in front of the manager of the building. Reality proved that no matter what function the machine Jack used, it could only be a pile of scrap metal once the power supply was cut off. I want to obtain information. You want to obtain time. The meaning of communication lies in this. But no one can obtain it. So what? It seemed that the last remnant images of his peers in the boxing ring still remained before Luo Nan's eyes. He didn't care whether or not Jack could see them. His soul body made the same negative action of crossing its arms. Chapter 114. As the last bit of electric current disappeared in the darkness, Jack's intense movements also stopped. He sat in the middle of the machine, and the wires on his body broke off one after another. In the end, all that was left was a violent gasp. The interruption of the power supply seemed to have placed an unexpected burden on Jack. However, his bionic eyes didn't dim because of the power cut. On the contrary, they became more and more dazzling as his emotions fluctuated. While panting, Jack emphasized again, "You arrogant bastard. Damn it. Do you know what you've done? I did something that made you very unhappy and I plan to continue doing it." This was what Luo Nan said and this was what he did. The human-faced arachnid, who had just completed its mission, had already passed through the wall and returned to Luo Nan's side. Under Luo Nan's guidance, the human-faced arachnid threw itself at Jack. Luo Nan could now confirm that Jack's previous words weren't a lie. There really was a certain difference between soul bodies and darksider life forms. Jack was clearly able to lock onto the soul body, but he was completely unaware of the arrival of the human-faced arachnid. This was despite the fact that half of the human-faced arachnid's body was about to merge into his body. But on the other hand, the human-faced arachnid couldn't seem to find a place to eat Jack. Even though Jack was enraged to the point of madness, his special soul defense was still working. Right now, the human-faced arachnid was at best a probing imaging device. Even if it could clearly probe the inner workings of Jack's brain, it wouldn't be able to create any interference. It also lacked interest. The human-faced arachnid really had no interest in Jack at all. It wasn't because the low-level turbid flow of emotions was no longer part of its menu. It was because this thing simply couldn't be eaten. It was like an excellent painter could paint a flower so lifelike that it would attract bees and butterflies, but he would never be able to pick the honey. This was the difference between a real object and a painting, the difference between reality and illusion. From the human-faced arachnid's perspective, Jack's emotions were a vivid yet false picture. It could be seen that the structure and operation of Jack's brain, which had been partially modified, were shockingly concise and efficient. What kind of stimulation would trigger which cluster of neurons, what kind of neurotransmitters would be produced, and what kind of conduction between neurons would be triggered, forming a continuous running assembly line. At first glance, this was no different from a normal person's mental model. But as a matter of fact, most of the emotions and psychological activities of human beings had complicated operating mechanisms. The coordinated activation of various brain regions was far from something that could be replaced by an ideal assembly line. If one were to delve deeper into this, they would discover that Jack's seemingly efficient and concise operation mode was more of an encoding method. The human-faced arachnid's probing was extraordinarily deep. The human-faced arachnid's tentacles had already spread to every nook and cranny of Jack's body without his knowledge. Because of this, it discovered a region that had been precisely modified in the depths of Jack's brain, probably at the location of the central mass that connected the left and right thalamus. There was an even smaller core embedded within it. Almost all of Jack's nerve activities would be transmitted through the channels that had been set up in advance to exchange information with the nucleus. This nucleus would transmit the corresponding stimulation to the various nerve centers and then give feedback. Without a doubt, this core played the role of a system integration. All kinds of codes were substituted into the formula to form the answer, and then transmitted out. This was originally a natural function of the brain, but it had been replaced by the mechanical reaction of the nucleus. This crucial step was the distinction between real and fake. Were all altered humans like this? Luonan didn't have too much confidence in his own observations. He was still guessing at the role of the nucleus. However, there was a situation that firmly grabbed his attention. There was a thin thread coiled around this extremely secretive nucleus body. No, it was the metal beetle. That's right, this was the metal beetle that Yen Yonghua had tossed out of the car. Luonan was incomparably certain because there was a small half of the beetle shape preserved at the end of the thin thread. He couldn't help but speculate that the metal beetle would completely disappear after a period of time. It would transform into the form of a thin thread. What were the conditions for the transformation? Luonan could more or less understand just by looking at the dark machine that had already stopped operating. It was also this coiled thread that gave Luonan an extremely familiar feeling. He used the human-faced arachnid as a medium to unleash his soul clairvoyance. He discovered that the thread clearly flickered with flickering electricity. And when he increased the precision of his senses a step further, he was certain that the thread had already split into countless even finer branches. Many of them had already exceeded the range of precision of his senses. Luonan could only see that some of these branches had pierced into the interior of the nucleus. Some of them had even seeped into the nerves and blood vessels. They had probably already spread throughout the entire brain, forming a tree-shaped structure with the nucleus as the center. This is the external neuron? What the fuck are you doing now? Luonan's unbridled probing methods had probably set off some sort of alarm device. Jack was horrified and startled. His blood-red robotic eyes locked rigidly onto the location of Luonan's soul body. But compared to these things on the surface, the changes that had occurred within Jack's brain were what truly shook Luonan's mind. It was that thin thread that had split into countless branches. The thin thread pierced into various parts of Jack's brain. It instantly trembled with tightly woven electrical fire. The electrical fire didn't occur on the plane of reality. At least it wasn't limited to just that. This was because the human-faced arachnid that was deep within felt a burning sensation that was enough to endanger its existence at this very moment. It didn't need Luonan's command to frantically retreat outwards. Jack's mood template of rage had certainly been adjusted to the highest level. His entire body stood up, and it was also at this moment that his body clearly emitted a dark and deep glow of flames. The glow of flames came from the inside out, forcibly blasting the human-faced arachnid out of Jack's body. Moreover, the human-faced arachnid's momentum didn't decrease in the slightest as it pounced towards Luonan's location. The human-faced arachnid let out a pained howl. The powerful attack on the mental plane instantly swept through the many floors of the Deshang building. It was unknown how many people were innocently affected in this instant. Luonan was already unable to care about these things. The instant the glow of flames erupted, he exhausted all of the strength of his soul to leap through the air. Luonan was transported in a dizzying manner, but the distance he flew was far below Luonan's estimations. He just flew out of the room. The entire distance didn't exceed 20 meters. An incorporeal magnetic field formed around Jack's body when the glow of flames erupted. It warped the mental plane and even the space of reality. It was as if Luonan's soul body had fallen into a bottomless deep sea. An astonishing pressure came from all directions. This feeling was far too familiar. On the warship a few days ago, the burning wraith that He Yuan had beheaded had suffered a similar technique. It had been locked onto, controlled, and then turned into ashes. Luonan's mind truly trembled as if electricity had passed through it. Chapter 115. You Can't Escape. Jack's hoarse voice was like the low cry of a deep-sea monster. It penetrated through the walls, shaking Luonan's soul body to the point of being slightly shaken. Was this guy really a burner? Based on the information that Luonan knew, burners were not like this. At the very least, the burners under Yen Hong's archetype formatting theory were not like this. Otherwise, there would be no need for the deep blue platform or the exoskeleton armor. He could just modify his entire body. However, what Jack had displayed was indeed the power of the format of fire. In the next second, the thick and heavy walls of the training room rumbled and violently deformed. A hole had been blasted open in the center, and cracks spread out like a spider web. Jack's training room was located in the middle of the 141st floor. It was a space sealed off by 4 thick and heavy soundproof walls. Only one side had an open door. The direction Luonan chose to jump in was the opposite of the main door. He stretched out the normal path of pursuit to the greatest extent. However, Jack's choice was completely different from a normal person's. Using Jack as a reference, Luonan was actually really affected by the human mindset. He should have gone up or down just now. There was a floor separating them. Even if there was interference from the magnetic field, the situation would be completely different. Luonan didn't have the mind to reflect on his actions. He still tried to pull away, but the pressure his soul body endured continued to rise, making it difficult for him to move forward. Hell, even the military's burners, with the support of their exoskeleton armor, didn't have this kind of power. The wall exploded with a bang following another heavy strike. Jack walked out with large strides. His naked eye and bionic eye locked firmly onto Luonan's position. At this moment, the scene of flames soaring around his body had already disappeared, but the magnetic field that was like the deep sea was even more powerful. Through soul observation, he could confirm that Jack's entire body was deeply integrated with the deep sea EM field. The energy circulating within his body endlessly increased the effectiveness of the magnetic field. And the exertion of strength with every movement could bring about an intense change in the magnetic field. This was undoubtedly a terrible experience for Luonan. Jack stared at the direction where the soul was. His rage seemed to have been controlled, and his voice became hoarse and deep. "Young man, do you know how great of a price I paid in order to obtain the Deep Sea Type 4 Dynamo Core? Do you know how much your naughty behavior will cost me?" Dynamo Core? Is that the official name for the external neuron? Also, does this model also represent the corresponding ability? Just like the deep sea EM field that Jack was radiating, Luonan unconsciously pondered over this word, and Jack didn't immediately attack him. Instead, he sized up the surroundings with a somewhat uncertain appearance. Ability users nowadays are really amazing. I actually saw a young man who can raise a dark side of life form. Moreover, that breed seems to be quite interesting. Jack should be probing. Though he had injured the human-faced arachnid, he was still unable to capture its whereabouts. Luonan responded with silence. His attitude made Jack laugh coldly. "Alright, I'll add this incident to my database and tell it to people who are willing to listen to my story. As for you, I have no desire to communicate at all." The exact same words were returned to him by Jack. If it was in the past, Luonan would have felt that Jack's words were sharp. But right now he couldn't help but think. Was this Jack's free will, or was it the result of an artificial intelligence's calculations? This riddle would not be solved in a short amount of time. Luonan deeply felt Jack's murderous intent. He didn't hesitate any longer. He concentrated all of his energy and fled regardless of everything. This time he learned from his previous lesson and directly fled to the bottom of the floor. Though the distance was even more pitiful than last time, less than 4 meters, the floor was constructed from a combination of concrete and high-strength light alloy. It was much tougher than the wall material that Jack had smashed apart. Jack's attack smashed down and the floor instantly caved in, but it didn't immediately collapse. Luonan took advantage of this opportunity to dive down another floor. The straight-line distance between him and Jack had already increased to over 30 meters. The binding power of the deep sea EM field suddenly weakened. Luonan's heart was filled with joy. He was about to forcefully leap through space once more. This time, his target was the night sky outside of the Deshang building. As long as he reached the void where there was nothing to rely on, Jack wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Then a muffled bang rang out and the bullet, which possessed powerful kinetic energy, instantly pierced through 2 floors of the floor. Even though the bullet deviated a bit in the process of piercing through, it still exploded near Luonan's soul body. The churning cloud of fire had the effect of a magnetic field, giving his soul body enormous interference. Luo Nan had seen similar special ammunition on the warship before, but the effect of this round was clearly stronger. And the ammunition wasn't just one round. It was a continuous barrage of bullets. All of them passed through the hole that had just been pierced through, exploding in succession. For a time, the cloud of fire pervaded the air, igniting a few flammable items on the floor. The 2 floors of the floor were forcibly smashed through in this one delay. Jack flew down just like that. The powerful deep sea EM field had already enveloped Luo Nan before he even arrived. It was as if Luo Nan's soul body had been thrown into the deep sea once more. It suddenly became sluggish and difficult to move. And this time, the temperature at the bottom of the sea rose crazily. It was like a volcano erupting in the sea, wanting to cook him thoroughly. Luo Nan suddenly felt a sense of weakness as he sank into it. It came from nothing and it gradually became clear. It wasn't that Jack's format of fire or the deep sea EM field caused great harm to his soul body. Instead, the human-faced arachnid, who acted as an external fuel tank, had received heavy damage from the first wave of attacks. It had yet to recover. Luo Nan hadn't truly reached the standard of an out-of-body state. He was able to roam freely in the form of a soul body. To a large extent, he had to rely on the energy provided by the human-faced arachnid. Jack's format of fire exploded, inadvertently striking Luo Nan's vital point. This wasn't good. And at this time, Jack's grand action of tearing down walls and setting them on fire finally triggered a response from the building's defense system. Right now, the floor the 2 were on was the office area of a certain large company. It was the weekend, so there wasn't a single person inside. The first to respond was the building's automatic mechanical security system. The door to the office area rumbled open following the simultaneous activation of the fire alarm and burglary alarm lights. A civilian defense robot drove into the room. The barrel of its anti-riot gun was aimed at the only visible target, Jack. The problem was that the anti-riot gun hadn't even fired when the robot received a brand new command. It entered a docile standby state. Then the fire alarm and the burglary alarm all stopped. The building recovered its silence. Only the office items that had been set ablaze within the flames were left to burn. Jack didn't even turn his head during this entire process. He just stared dead at the location of Luo Nan's soul body. Chapter 116. Ronan had witnessed the entire process of Jack controlling the situation. It was as if Jack was holding a remote control for action and stop. With just a press, the security system of the entire floor or even the entire building froze. This scene absolutely wasn't the result of Jack's high level of authority in the Deshang building. This was because the robot didn't have any procedures to test his authority. It directly ceased all activities and didn't have any power to resist. This made Luo Nan think of Cragburst's pitiful jeep. Luo Nan finally broke his silence. He used psychic waves to transmit, "How did you do it? Oh, another exchange?" Jack sneered. "Why are you making a fuss? You can control. Oh, and dark side of life forms. I can control machinery. That's fair." Jack didn't refuse to communicate, but he didn't respond directly either. He didn't mind dealing with Luo Nan a bit more. After all, he couldn't find any traces of the Darksider life form from beginning to end. This caused him to brood over it. He needed time to adjust the relevant parameters of the database and unceasingly revise the range of his detection. Luo Nan could more or less guess what Jack was doing. After all, many of Jack's detection methods required the use of that electronic eye, so Jack was constantly turning his head. This was good news. It seemed that Jack was very afraid of the Darksider life form. Perhaps there was still a threat to the current him? Luo Nan secretly paid attention to this, but right now a large portion of his mind couldn't help drifting in the direction of controlling machinery. Jack and Yen Yongguo's previous actions reminded him of another similar example. Gear's underground laboratory. To put it more bluntly, the external neuron. Luo Nan could confirm that the thread in Jack's brain was indeed the external neuron. It was also the dynamo core that Luo Nan spoke of. It was this product that seemed to surpass the technology of Earth that allowed it to bypass all authority and directly control all information devices, manipulating them at will. And now, new facts told him that other than the aforementioned functions, this thing was also the key to the burner and format of fire. Such a strange creation had actually accompanied him for 5 years, and it was mailed to him by that coward. What did that mean? What did that mean? It was hard for Luo Nan to divert his attention to ponder over this matter during the violent storm of pursuit and escape. Now that he had the slightest bit of time, the relevant thoughts were like heart-devouring bugs, gnawing and grinding in his heart. External neuron? Dynamo core? Burners? Gang leader? Yen Yongbua? Quantum Corporation, and that coward. Luo Nan's mind was practically tied into a dead knot by the sudden clues and bursts of information. If he didn't loosen up a bit, then his soul would suffocate. Luo Nan suddenly felt very regretful. Perhaps he really should have listened to Jack's 2 more stories. No matter what, he wanted to know what kind of connection there was between Jack, the mafia leader, and that coward. Right now, Luo Nan had to work hard for this goal. He did his best to maintain a clear line of thought. He used psychic waves to transmit information as slowly as possible to probe Jack's reaction. Controlling machines at will? You don't have that ability. Otherwise, you wouldn't be hiding in the recycle stratum as a mafia boss. Instead, you'd be running out to do whatever you want. Jack laughed hoarsely. Are you trying to provoke me? Kid, you've already succeeded before, so you don't have to worry about how you die. I admit that you have the ability to kill me. After all, you are already a burner. What, did I say something wrong? Luo Nan saw Jack grin from the corner of his mouth. The sarcasm within was thick. Jack shrugged his shoulders. It's nothing. People always have the right to be ignorant. I don't have the obligation to correct them. Kid, there's no need to probe anymore. Call your pet. I'll give you a more satisfying death. Luo Nan would be stupid to listen to Jack's words. But Jack's sarcastic smile and tone were quite interesting. It was a kind of aloof superiority. The people he spoke of didn't seem to be specifically referring to Luo Nan. Instead, it was an unbridled map cannon. It was brimming with the flavor of, everyone in the world is drunk, but I am the only sober one. Luo Nan remembered that a considerable portion of Jack's high-level mental activity originated from the data template of the nucleus. In a certain sense, Jack was more real than any normal person. Then where did this sense of superiority come from? Luo Nan sized up Jack once more. The information he obtained from the mafia members showed that this savage and cruel fellow had become the mafia leader of this region in just a span of 2 to 3 years. He started off as a fighting instructor. He used the bloody 70% elimination rule to rapidly become an important figure in the fighting arena. Then he became a referee, a host, a partner, and finally became the chief spokesperson of the fighting arena's mafia power. His abilities overflowed as a mafia leader, but this didn't mean that he was the same in other areas. Then, it's the metal beetle, right? Luo Nan suddenly spoke up and went straight to the point. Jack was a bit startled, then he laughed. Are you still going to be angry, young man? Luo Nan ignored Jack's interference. His thoughts were so certain that everything that happened within Jack's body was exposed to the prying eyes of the human-faced arachnid. Yen Yongboy used it to control our jeep and then you came over to deal with it. But you're clearly more interested in the metal beetle itself. Oh, the metal beetle is too unprofessional. You call it the dynamo core? The Deep Sea Type 4 dynamo core. It's a mystical device that allows ordinary altered humans to possess abilities similar to a burner. Jack was silent for a moment. The dark red electronic eyes that had been searching for the human-faced arachnid turned back to stare at the blurry figure of Luo Nan's soul body. You're trying to display your own intelligence? But we don't recruit new people here? The intensity of the deep CEM field continued to increase as Jack spoke. Luo Nan's soul body felt even worse. From Luo Nan's perspective, the most important thing to do right now was to break free from Jack's control as quickly as possible and flee far away. However, the spiritual light gushing out from his mind interweaved into sections of thought. Under the pressure of the outside world, he pieced them together and advanced layer by layer. He was unwilling to interrupt this process. The dynamo core is very precious to you, so Yen Yongbo will use it to pay you. But looking at the model number, this should be a product that has already been put into production. At the very least, it's a trial production series of products. The only ones who possess this kind of manufacturing ability and are closely related to the burner are Quantum Corporation and their related powers. Luo Nan's brain power operated. It had certainly reached the pinnacle of his 15 years of life. He didn't directly converse with Jack. Instead, he endlessly tossed out a few bait in his words. At the same time, he earnestly observed all of Jack's reactions, using them to revise his own inferences. Of course, there's also you. You're an altered human, but you don't come from the military. You just happen to be so adaptable to the burner's abilities. The number of people in this world who can do this can be counted on one hand. So I believe that you also come from Quantum Corporation and that you've always worked for the apex technology company of this earth. Luo Nan saw Jack's face reveal a mocking smile of superiority just as the psychic wave message was transmitted. Chapter 117. Seeing Jack's expression, Luo Nan seemed to be able to hear his main body's heart skip a beat. He had deliberately added the modifier phrase, Earth's top technology company, in order to probe into Jack's relationship with Quantum Corporation. He had thought of many reactions beforehand, but he never imagined that Jack would bring this smile over. Even the curve of Jack's mouth was exactly the same. Luo Nan admitted that he had to reconsider Jack's relationship with Quantum Corporation. But before that, there was one thing he needed to make clear. Why? Why would a gang leader holed up in the recycling stratum use this sort of attitude to point at a power that was ranked in the top 3 in terms of market value in the world? Using the simplest of straight-line logic to consider things, wouldn't that mean that behind Jack's back, at least in his consciousness, there was a colossus that could look down upon Quantum Corporation, the Earth's apex tech company, with eyes of contempt? Luo Nan once again thought of the hooks buried within Jack's words. Soul Configuration's Deep Blue World. These were terms he had never heard of before. Now that he thought about it, it was extremely likely that they hid a world-shocking secret. Is that coward related to these things? How deep was the connection? Thoughts spun in his mind, but time didn't allow Luo Nan to think too much. He could only continue his previous train of thought and make some slight adjustments to probe Jack's background. You're both employees of Quantum Corporation, but Yen Yonghua can control the Rainbow Fund. You can only hang around in a gang. He can casually toss out a dynamo core and you'll fight to the death for it. From what I know, Yen Yonghua hasn't been a part of Quantum Corporation for long. Is it because of his strength that he was able to quickly climb to a high position? Or is it because of his father? Or perhaps, as an altered human who needs the help of a dynamo core to possess the abilities of a burner is destined to be a defective product from the production line? You're too damn smart. Another humming sound rang out from within the low and hoarse roar. The pressure and heat of the deep CEM field rapidly rose. Under the sudden increase in pressure, Luo Nan's soul body was forcibly compressed. Clearly Luo Nan's words had stabbed Jack's sore spot. The smile on Jack's face completely disappeared. He reached out with his hand and pressed it against his forehead. It was as if he was concealing his momentary loss of self-control. But the electronic eye that was already on the verge of burning exposed his current mood. Fury template. Highest level. Right now, Luo Nan was already straining to even transmit psychic waves. However, he was even more clear that if he were to really give up like this, Jack would very likely immediately make a move to finish him off. He needed a little more time. Did I misspeak? I'm really sorry. I'm just saying my guesses. Some of them might sound stupid, but I think our current situation is even more stupid. That's right. The speaker is stupid and the listener isn't smart either. Jack panted heavily. The last time he reacted like this was when the power went out. But this was really effective. His emotions began to recover and he was even mocking himself. This level of control seemed to be something only a modified person who could switch their template at any time could achieve. Ronan noticed Jack's restraint. It was reasonable to say that this callous altered human had many opportunities. He could erupt with a powerful format of fire and turn Luo Nan's soul body into ashes. But he never truly made a move other than that first strike. Compared to the ruthlessness and decisiveness he displayed before, the current Jack was a little too hesitant. This had nothing to do with intelligence or stupidity. It could only be considered from a more realistic level. Was it fear of the Darksider lifeforms? Or was it because of a more direct, more fatal reason? Jack clearly wouldn't reveal the answer, and he also made substantial movements. He began to walk forward, closing the distance between him and Luo Nan's soul body. As the distance shrunk, the pressure of the magnetic field increased exponentially. Luo Nan tried to retreat, but the results were minimal. Jack revealed a smile once more. I've heard back in the deep blue world that it's possible to use the powerful magnetic field of the dynamo core to confine and capture souls, and even Darksider lifeforms. Right now I can give it a try. The deep blue world? Luo Nan's first thought was actually the information that came from far beyond the heavens. He only truly reacted in the next moment. Jack actually wanted to capture him alive? Yes, looking at the increasing pressure of the magnetic field, Jack really did have this kind of plan. Compared to the beginning, Luo Nan's soul body had already shrunk by more than 2 times. If this continued, he would probably become the legendary 1-inch mage, someone who could be needed by anyone. Luo Nan was already unable to think of anything else. He concentrated all of his energy wanting to make his soul body move once more. But at this time, the only thing that could move his entire body was the heavily chained crow, which had been circulating without end from beginning to end. Chains? Luonan's thoughts were still unclear when the vibrating amplitude of the heavily chained crow suddenly increased. But this wasn't an internal force, it was an external impact. A sharp hissing sound rang out. A phantom pounced out from the floor below, forcibly colliding into the deep CEM field. The impact force on the mental plane actually caused the magnetic field's operation to suddenly stagnate. Luonan's soul body was struck by this phantom in the next moment. The phantom tightened and then loosened. Then Luonan flew backwards like he was riding on a cloud, escaping from the range of the deep CEM field's control. The human-faced arachnid. This malevolent monster had killed its way out when it was needed the most. Its body still carried the vapors of turbid currents of emotions. The heavy injuries from the format of fire could no longer be seen, at least on the surface. Success. Luonan's mind relaxed. He flipped over and stood on the back of the human-faced arachnid. He urged this monster, which had just drunk a blood potion, to fly towards the nearest outer wall of the building without turning his head. Jack's heavy and swift footsteps rang out behind him. He was still in pursuit, his speed rapidly increasing. And the large cubicle layout of this floor's office gave him ample space to accelerate. The deep CEM field followed Jack's pursuit, moving like a shadow behind Luonan and the human-faced arachnid. It was like a silent evil beast, staring fixedly at its prey, wanting to devour it as soon as possible. But in the end it was useless. A distance of several dozen meters was far too short for a soul body. Luonan and the human-faced arachnid directly smashed through the outer wall of the building in the time of a single breath. They flashed again in the interweaving neon lights of the night sky, flying 1,000 meters into the air. Jack charged to the end of the building. His momentum hadn't dissipated yet, so he heavily smashed into the French window. The tempered glass, which was of considerable strength and toughness, exploded with spiderweb cracks in an instant. Unexpectedly, it didn't shatter. But the lightweight alloy that held the four sides in place was unable to withstand the impact. The entire French window was peeled off from the wall by Jack, falling rapidly to the ground. Jack used the momentum to dissipate his momentum. He stood at the edge of the empty building and pulled out a thick-barreled handgun. It should be the one that had shot out the military special ammunition. The muzzle of the gun was aimed at the night sky. But in the end, Jack didn't fire in vain. He just stared coldly at the empty shadow in the night sky. Only after a long while did he turn around and leave. Chapter 118. Aren't you taking things too easy? Luonan stood in the night sky. He watched Jack hatefully leave through the crisscrossing light rail outside of the Deshang building. He let out a long sigh in his heart and laughed in spite of himself. There was a very interesting relationship between Luonan and Jack right now. Jack's deep CEM field possessed the ability to instantly heavily injure or even kill Luonan, but its effective range was limited. Luonan himself didn't have any methods to threaten Jack, but he had an extremely long range of perception with a radius of 500 meters. This meant that when Luonan pulled apart the distance between him and Jack, it would be nearly impossible for Jack to escape Luonan's tracking and locking onto him. Luonan cut a sorry figure within the deep CEM field. Now Jack's movements would be just as distressed. Each and every one of Jack's movements would be exposed to Luonan's clairvoyance. Luonan patted the human-faced arachnid lightly, indicating for it to follow. The human-faced arachnid suddenly flew into the air. It swiftly plunged down from the night sky and crashed into the Deshang building once more. It passed through the wall as if it was nothing. The turbid smoke curled around its body, making it look demonic and bizarre. Luonan's mental senses locked onto Jack, who was over 20 floors away. A distance of 100 meters, centimeter precision, and several dozen floors. It was safe and meticulous at the same time, and Luonan could react in time. Jack was certainly able to sense Luonan's monitoring and locking onto him. He turned his head repeatedly along the way, accurately locking onto the direction of Luonan's soul body every time. But so what? He still couldn't do anything to Luonan. Luonan was much more relaxed this time. He stared at Jack's whereabouts as he sorted out the situation with the human-faced arachnid. Right now Luonan's soul body was standing on the back of the human-faced arachnid. The sensation on the mental plane was very strange. Even though his nervous system was able to restore the sensation to the greatest degree, there were still some things that were impossible to translate. He could only understand them. Luonan came into contact with the human-faced arachnid. It was like he was standing on top of a cloud covered in burrs. There was nothing below him, but there was the scorching internal pressure and external tension acting at the same time, propping up the sensation on the mental plane. The so-called internal pressure and tension was just a rough feeling. The human-faced arachnid's foundation structure was actually hidden within. The current precision of Luo Nan's senses wasn't enough to pry into the mysteries within, but he could roughly sense that the foundation structure of the human-faced arachnid was actually a bit loose. The human-faced arachnid had collided head-on with Jack's format of fire when the human-faced arachnid had suffered heavy injuries. Most of its devil body had been melted away by the format of fire. Less than half of its body remained. But from the perspective of the human-faced arachnid, this sort of injury was serious but not fatal. It could consume a spiritual seed, or its own kind to achieve rapid recovery and even increase in power. But Luo Nan instinctively rejected the first evil method. As for the second method, where would he find other human-faced arachnid clones in such a short time? Even if they found it, it was hard to say who would swallow who. Therefore, Luo Nan could only choose the stupidest path for him. Go drink water from the turbid flow of emotions. Drink until you're full. It didn't matter if the human-faced arachnid was happy or not. This was the only way for the human-faced arachnid to recover as soon as possible. Fortunately, the underground fighting arena at the bottom of the Dashang building was a dirty reservoir of negative emotions. Luo Nan gave the human-faced arachnid a death order. He would eat wherever he went, but he had to avoid Rui Wen and Crag Burst. In a certain sense, his conversation with Jack was tantamount to buying time for the human-faced arachnid. Right now, Luo Nan's plan could be considered a success. The human-faced arachnid had recovered a bit of its vitality, saving Luo Nan from the most fatal danger. But from another perspective, the consequences of forcing the human-faced arachnid to drink dirty water were extremely serious. Even though the human-faced arachnid had suffered heavy injuries from the format of fire, its foundation was still quite solid. It was just weak due to excessive consumption. Now this fellow appeared to have an imposing aura, but its foundation was quite unstable. It had dropped by more than one level from its peak, and it wasn't easy to make up for it. Luo Nan knew from this that the grade of food was extremely important to the human-faced arachnid. It absolutely could not touch the return grass, unless it was absolutely necessary. Speaking of which, were the people in the fighting arena still alive? Crag Burst's voice came over just as this thought flashed through his mind. Hello, hello. Hello, hello? Scout, did you get disconnected? Nope. From beginning to end, Luo Nan hadn't informed Crag Burst that he had come alone to find Jack. On one hand, he didn't want to expose the existence of his soul body. On the other hand, he felt that Rui Wen, who was in the fighting arena, needed Crag Burst's attention. He had considered everything thoroughly, but he never thought that he would be faced with such a dangerous situation. It was reasonable to say that with the existence of the Hexayear, the communication between the two should have been unobstructed. The two had even spoken to each other before facing off against Jack head-on. But Crag Burst didn't make a sound for a period of time. Now that Luo Nan thought about it, he found it very strange. Luo Nan thought about that dangerous situation. Perhaps Jack's deep CEM field had an interference effect. I saw that your crow was smacking its lips. I thought that your spirit attachment time was up. No. Wait a moment. Luo Nan controlled the human-faced arachnid to switch to a large angle. He arrived at the middle floor of the Dashang building. He could completely display the advantage of his sensing range here, encompassing the entire Dashang building. The situation of the underground fighting arena entered into Luo Nan's control in an instant. However, paying attention to both sides at the same time was quite a challenge to his energy and observation precision. The situation of the underground fighting arena was somewhat outside of Luo Nan's expectations. Mr. Ma's little darling hadn't been transported over yet. There was only Rui Wen by herself on the fighting arena. But the faces of the several hundred tycoons in the spectator stands were all glowing with health. They were full of energy and they were even more excited. They chatted loudly with their gambling opponents, provoked them and endlessly increased the stakes. Or they teased the accompanying beauties, handsome men, and even the sexual services provided by the fighting arena. Some simply acted on the spot and did preposterous things under the watchful eyes of the crowd. Of course, this could also become a part of the gambling game. Had they really just been swept clean by the human-faced arachnid? They're all crazy. As an ability user, Crag Burst had seen many preposterous and depraved scenes in his many years of adventuring. But the current situation could be counted on one hand. This is simply some secret order's carnival ceremony. They use all methods to please the demon god. Do you think that there's really an order behind them? I don't know. Though Luo Nan said this with his mouth, he was reminded by Crag Burst to pour a bit more energy into the ugly tycoons over there. Oh, this kind of emotion. What a big empty fire. Chapter 119. The human-faced arachnid was a first-rate looter and arsonist. Luo Nan was certain that the human-faced arachnid had just swept through this place wantonly. It was not an exaggeration to say that it had sucked the marrow from the bones. But during this process, the human-faced arachnid displayed its outstanding looting techniques. It swallowed the negative emotions and the corresponding energy and vitality. It hollowed out the foundations of the vast majority of people here, leaving behind some floating soil and leaves. Then it lit a fire to its heart's content. The negative emotions that went out of control were the spark. The floating energy and vitality were the fuel to ignite the fire. There were many examples like this in reality. The weaker the body, the more uncontrollable the desire. The moment one lost control, the last bit of vitality within one's body would be completely squeezed out and burned away. Right now, the rich people in the stands, including their attendants and secretaries, and the large amount of related staff members of the fighting arena had sunk into this situation. They were completely unaware of it. When Luo Nan saw through the crux of this, the situation of the fighting arena became completely different in his eyes. This wasn't a fighting arena at all. It was clearly a brazier that was about to burn dry. Or perhaps it was a deep mine that was filled with gas. It was the kind that had already been ignited. The enormous amount of negative emotions and the floating energy and vitality formed a cloud of fire that was hard to see with the naked eye. It diffused out on the mental plane. If these people could sense their own souls, they would discover that the most terrifying feeling of suffocation had already descended upon their heads. Only an awakened like Crag Burst could feel the intense feeling of disharmony within. He felt an enormous rejection towards this environment. Why did it create this environment? Luo Nan was disinclined to think too much about the final fate of the rich people in the stands. Instead, he was quite curious about the human-faced arachnid's way of doing things. In any case, Jack wasn't doing anything special right now. Luo Nan patted the human-faced arachnid beneath him, indicating for it to give him a demonstration. Of course the human-faced arachnid wouldn't refuse. It immediately flashed a few times and charged back into the fighting arena. Then it hid its demonic body deep within the cloud of fire. Its 6 heterochromatic demon eyes were half squinted and half opened. Its malevolent mouth opened wide and sucked in the cloud of fire. It then spat out the unstable muddy flow of emotions from within its body, forming a stable exchange. Luo Nan completely understood. The human-faced arachnid couldn't disobey Luo Nan's orders, so it created an environment to kill poison for itself. It did its utmost to remove the components within the turbid flow of emotions that it was unwilling to absorb. Even though he didn't know how much the human-faced arachnid would improve after this, it was fine as long as the human-faced arachnid was happy. In essence, the fighting arena was no longer a place where the rich and powerful could seek excitement and wantonly seek pleasure. Instead, it was an enormous altar. All the rulers who believed themselves to be infallible had become livestock placed on the altar. They were slaughtered as the human-faced arachnid desired. Though this didn't really conform to Luo Nan's aesthetics, he didn't feel the need to fix it. Glancing at Jack again, he saw that the fellow had slowed down and seemed to be thinking about something. Luo Nan didn't need the human-faced arachnid by his side at all times to track him. And the previous combat proved that it would be easier for Luo Nan to adapt if he and the human-faced arachnid were separated. Luo Nan let the human-faced arachnid stay in the fighting arena for the time being. It would be good to stabilize its unstable foundation a bit. However, less than 10 seconds after he made this decision, an unforeseen event occurred. Rui Wen, who had been standing on the stage with her hands by her side, suddenly raised her head, her gaze pointing towards the void above her head. That place was originally the position of the broadcast screen. Her image was displayed on the screen. Many people noticed this change and soon they gave a reasonable explanation. Oh. The flat-chested witch is starting to get sentimental. Is she going to see her final, whole image? There won't be another chance in the future. A commotion that wasn't too big nor too small set off in the fighting arena. The exceptionally excited spectators cast their filthy and mocking words together with their irrepressible emotions towards the fighting stage. Rui Wen didn't react to these stimulations at all. She just looked up in a daze. Was she looking at her own image? It wasn't like this. Luonan was certain that Rui Wen's gaze seemed to be directed towards the broadcast screen, but in reality the focus wasn't there at all. Instead, it was directed towards the human-faced arachnid. This was because the human-faced arachnid's 6 heterochromatic demon eyes suddenly opened in that instant and they pointed towards Rui Wen's position. The demonic body that had been idle within the flaming cloud suddenly tightened. Burning negative emotions and vital energy curled around its body, forming faintly discernible rings of fire. Luonan's command came in at this time. He was worried that the human-faced arachnid would actually take a bite out of Rui Wen, the spiritual seed that it had coveted for a long time. He wanted the human-faced arachnid to retract its position. The human-faced arachnid did as it was told, but Rui Wen's line of sight unexpectedly followed and moved without the slightest deviation. At this time, Cragburst felt that something was wrong. Hey, what is she looking at? I don't know. Luonan's scalp went numb when he said this. If this scene was not an illusion, then Rui Wen seemed to be able to see the human-faced arachnid. Could she see the dark side of life form? Rui Wen was an ability user? But why was there no sign before? Or had his ability just awakened? Was it the stimulation from the human-faced arachnid? A few questions popped up in his mind, but none of them could be answered. The human-faced arachnid growled in a low voice. This was the response to Luonan's command. Originally, only Luonan could hear it, but now Rui Wen, the cold and silent young girl on the fighting stage, raised her head once more. Her gaze pointed to the sky above the fighting arena. Luonan would be at the end of the line of sight if it extended its line of sight to approximately 300 meters. Goodness gracious. Luonan clearly knew that Rui Wen could not see him, but he was still shocked fiercely. He could not help but shift. Right when he was thinking about pondering over the girl's situation, he never expected that things would come and he would be overwhelmed. Jack ended his contemplation at this time and his speed suddenly increased. This fellow returned to his training room in a short half a minute. He picked up the wristband he had discarded earlier and seemed to be communicating with the outside world. Luonan's energy needed to be completely focused over there. Before this, he gave the human-faced arachnid another command. He told it to stay far away from Rui Wen, to stop distracting the girl's attention. After arranging everything, Luonan began to close the distance between him and Jack in order to increase the precision of his senses. But in the end, this was different from when he was facing his contact person. Unless Luonan didn't want his life anymore, it would be impossible for him to get close to Jack's side. And in this case, it was impossible to guarantee the precision of his senses. In the end, Luonan took the risk to advance to a distance of approximately 50 meters from Jack. He was able to feel the electrical waves radiating from the wristband, but he was only able to track it for a short distance before he had to give up. Jack's communication time was extremely short, and the direction of the transmission was clearly pointing outside of the Deshang building. The distance was so far that it far exceeded the limits of his senses. Maybe he was contacting Yen Yongbua? Luonan could only make blind guesses. And then Jack entered the training room's changing room and changed his clothes. A white shirt, a black bow tie and black trousers. These were the standard fighting referee attire. Then he shot a cold glance at Luonan's position, went straight out the door and entered the high-speed elevator. He wanted to go to the fighting arena? That gaze was clearly a provocation. It was very clear that some matters in the fighting arena had been exposed. The possibility of it being the human-faced arachnid was very small. Then, Cragburst, Jack's here. Which one? Where? Cragburst was stunned for a moment, but he quickly came back to his senses. He immediately looked for Luonan to confirm. Chapter 120. This was a rebellion. Luonan flew into a sudden rage. The heavily chained crow shook, forcefully pulling the human-faced arachnid back. The human-faced arachnid's body let out a hissing shriek as the fire cloud collapsed and dispersed. It was clear that it had suffered greatly. The human-faced arachnid's reaction was so miserable that it slightly dampened Luonan's anger. It seemed that his control over the human-faced arachnid hadn't lost its effectiveness. He thought about how this fellow had just saved his life, and his heart softened. Moreover, what was the use of being angry at this kind of person who had no intelligence and only acted on instinct? Luonan was baffled. The human-faced arachnid had always been obedient ever since it was bound by the heavily chained crow. It didn't do anything out of line with Rui Wen before. Why did it suddenly go out of control? He needed to think carefully about the problems within. At this time, Jack took the high-speed elevator and walked through the special tunnel. He had already arrived at the combat arena, but he did not directly show himself. Instead, he entered the VIP box and met with the contact person. He did not say anything useful for a while. Luo Nan concentrated his energy to consider the problem of the human-faced arachnid. Communicating with the human-faced arachnid that had no intelligence to speak of was a very strenuous matter. It wouldn't tell Luo Nan what it was thinking. Luo Nan could only rely on himself to search for the problematic link within the chaotic information. According to the flexible e-ink screen, his current analysis of the human-faced arachnid was 2%. In other words, 98% of the messages were garbled. Trying to find something comprehensible and useful from this garbled code was really, what is this? Luo Nan's soul body faintly rippled. He was shocked by the dynamic image that was suddenly reflected before his eyes. The image should be the external information that the human-faced arachnid had absorbed before, so it was straightforward and clear. Luo Nan was stunned for a moment before he quickly recognized that this was a complete diagram of the human body's structure. There were even mechanical components mixed within. As for the specimen, it was undoubtedly Jack. Luo Nan used the human-faced arachnid to pry into the mysteries of Jack's body. Luo Nan's main focus was placed on the activity of Jack's brain. He only skimmed over the other aspects. But Luo Nan never expected that the human-faced arachnid would actually record the entire scene of Jack's body. Moreover, the human-faced arachnid used a form that Luo Nan was unable to understand to make an integration. What appeared in front of Luo Nan right now was a scene that seemed like a scene from a movie. As for the time period it appeared, it was right before Jack ignited the format of fire, right before the human-faced arachnid was completely blasted out. So Luo Nan saw that the dynamo core had split into a myriad of fine filaments. They pierced through the blood vessels and nerves, spreading throughout Jack's entire body. They instantly opened up a complex yet complete structure. The energy that came from every part of Jack's body, whether it was physical or mechanical, was integrated and transformed under this structure. At that moment, Jack seemed to have transformed into a precise piece of equipment controlled by a super chip. His position, time, and output were all perfectly coordinated. Because of this, the highly concentrated internal pressure didn't destroy his body at the first moment. Instead, he stepped on the dangerous boundary and successfully transported the densely woven electric fire back to the area where the nucleus and the dynamo core were located. The dynamo core lit up under the high-energy convergence. The originally flickering electric light on the spiritual plane became bright and dazzling. It was precisely during this process that the energy within Jack's body completed an inconceivable qualitative transformation. In other words, it crossed a dimension from the plane of reality and touched upon the spiritual realm. Ignition successful. Nice. Luo Nan's soul body suddenly spun in a circle to calm his excited emotions. He didn't know how this ignition method was different from that of a normal burner, but this was the first time he had seen the entire ignition process of the format of fire. Even if the true core steps weren't revealed, the crucial step of energy transformation should be completed within the dynamo core. But it didn't matter. This concept and train of thought was already priceless. Whether it was Quantum Corporation or some even larger power, their research train of thought on the burner line was the same as opening it up to Luo Nan. Luo Nan thought about how Quantum Corporation had spent over a decade to suddenly obtain a project worth $1 trillion in investment. He felt a deep pleasure of revenge. The problem was, this wasn't the end. Unexpectedly, this scene, which had been highly integrated by the human-faced arachnid, continued to be edited. The scene that appeared next was much more blurry, and the time node rewound to the moment when the dynamo core split into a myriad of fine filaments to support the structure. The image of Jack's body turned illusory. Large areas of his body were erased. All that was left was a frame constructed from the dynamo core, blood vessels, nerves, and a portion of the body's tissues. The energy passed through this frame, converged, and ignited. Luo Nan could see that this was a replay of the ignition process from before. The replay highlighted the importance of the structure itself. It erased the irrelevant branches and pushed the marvels of ignition forward once more. This also made Luo Nan think of the self-formatting. Wasn't his current body structure similar in nature? An exquisite reference. Perhaps he could refer to this model in his cultivation in the future? Luo Nan's sighs of emotion had just appeared when the continuous advancement of the scene cut carried out a second replay. It was still starting from the beginning, but this time, the complex structure supported by the dynamo core became a blurry background. There were only simple lines, straight or arcs, connecting the key nodes of the structure. Or perhaps they were simply born out of thin air. Perhaps they were magnetic lines? Luonan had to admit that he was completely unable to understand it. But, when the straight lines and arcs were pieced together, they formed a complete and sealed figure in the center. When it finally appeared before his eyes, a certain trembling feeling rose from the bottom of Luonan's heart. It dominated his everything. It was a kind of throbbing that penetrated the darkness and illuminated the splendor. A regular tetrahedron might not necessarily be that straight. An inscribed ball wasn't completely tangent to all four sides. An outbounding ball wasn't perfectly connected to all four ends. But this structure, this silhouette, and the marvelous concept that emerged from it were like a heavy fist that smashed into Luonan's heart. His chaotic state of mind was smashed into a chaotic mess. All that was left was the figure that had long since assimilated with his mind, the figure that was completely branded into the depths of his soul. A regular tetrahedron and an inscribed and circumscribed sphere. The human-faced arachnid's analytical figure and Luonan's visualization figure miraculously intertwined and connected at this moment. The throbbing that only belonged to the adherent of formatting theory completely exploded. Luonan froze on the spot. He forgot to restrain the human-faced arachnid. The arachnid obtained its freedom and displayed its simple-minded nature. It let out another sharp hiss and pounced towards Rue when on the fighting stage. Luonan reacted halfway, but he didn't stop the arachnid. This was because the scene of his clairvoyance was completely different at this moment. The human-faced arachnid didn't want to treat Rue as food. Its pounce was more like a connection. It pushed close to Ruewen's body and stirred up turbid clouds of fire, nearly submerging Ruewen completely. The sparkling and translucent spiritual seed was like a star that pierced through the layer of clouds. It emitted a resplendent brilliance. Ruewen and the human-faced arachnid shook at the same time. The arachnid began to circle around Ruewen. Ruewen's gaze followed half a circle. She slowly closed her eyes when she was about to turn around. Chapter 121. The shape of a circle is still too abstract. I need to be more concrete. Luonan stared fixedly at the fighting stage. He looked at the special connection between the human-faced arachnid and Ruewen. At the same time, the spectators on the stands were also watching. All they saw was Ruewen's closed eyes. For this reason, they ridiculed, mocked, and cursed from the stands. They used all the filthy words they could to release the pressure and emotions they had accumulated in their daily lives. They released the sense of accomplishment and superiority that came from dictating the life and death of others. But in essence, they were a bunch of blind people, a bunch of stupid pigs and sheep that were still cheering happily on the altar. What they didn't know was that with every obscenity that came out of their mouths at the same time as they released their negative emotions, they also ignited their vitality and threw it into the sealed arena, turning into a part of the burning cloud of fire, and ultimately returning to nothingness. Luonan had no intention of despising these people. He had witnessed the two replays of the human-faced arachnid, and this told him a fact. The visualization diagram was not a mysterious thing that could be explained at any time. It contained a very complicated structure and extremely profound basic principles. What he saw was only a highly abstract shape. The two replays, especially the second one, proved that the operation of the visualization diagram had completely exceeded his level of understanding. He didn't have the right to overestimate his own eyesight, and he couldn't delude himself into trying to understand the deeper truth now. Mocking these spectators was like the pot calling the kettle black. The only thing he could do now was to maintain his reverence for the unknown and continue to observe and verify. Therefore, Luonan did everything he could to pay attention to the changes happening on the fighting stage. His perspective was a combination of the material and the mental plane, as well as his understanding of the turbid flow of emotions. Every second of observation and feeling brought about an astonishing consumption. All of this was worth it. Gradually, the actual images of the human-faced arachnid and Ruewen became blurry from Luonan's perspective. The fighting stage and even the entire fighting arena also became blurry. All of this turned into a visual and symbolic picture. Luonan saw a sea of burning clouds. The human-faced arachnid was a spider demon that swam within the sea of clouds. Ruewen, on the other hand, was the only shining star in this turbid sea of clouds. Bright, penetrating, and sharp. The radiance of the stars was like the sharp edge of the sword. The human-faced arachnid circled around the star, constantly drawing closer. It drove the turbid flow of emotions to conceal the light of the star. However, no matter how many negative emotions were entwined in the clouds, the ice-cold edge would always be able to cut them down, not staining them in the slightest. During this process, the edge of the stellar sword was also being tempered, becoming sharper and sharper. After dozens and hundreds of attacks, a large amount of turbid emotions did not even have the chance to pounce on it before they were turned into nothingness under the shining sharp light. But no matter how many he destroyed, the burning sea of clouds continued to advance. The sea of clouds roared and cursed. The excited spectators provided all of this. This group of pigs and sheep that had their blood drawn and their blades drawn were completely unaware that the sealed arena had already become a giant altar. Their vitality was the blood that flowed recklessly on the altar. It was the only paint that painted the burning sea of clouds. Finally, the human-faced arachnid let out a sharp hiss. It took the initiative to launch a substantial attack, throwing itself at Ruei-1. However, Ruei-1's stellar sword edge had been tempered to a new level after experiencing the impact of the thousands of turbid clouds of fire. The human-faced arachnid had yet to truly approach. It just received the light of the edge and countless fine wounds had already been sliced open on its malevolent demonic body. This was not an act. It was true damage. Luo Nan could feel the pain of the human-faced arachnid, but the deepest part of its reaction transmitted a joyful message. Joyful. The human-faced arachnid continued to advance, truly intersecting with the stellar sword edge. In an instant, one of its limbs was even sliced off. It fell into the burning sea of clouds and ignited with a rumble. The human-faced arachnid let out a long hiss of pain, but it turned around and threw itself over. It swallowed its own burning limb in a single gulp, trembling with excitement. Its aura weakened during this process, but it clearly congealed quite a bit. Correspondingly, its foundation structure was shaky and its situation improved somewhat. So it was like this. Luo Nan finally understood. The corresponding information was completely analyzed at this moment and flowed through his mind. There was no doubt that the human-faced arachnid was using Ruei-1. It discovered Ruei-1's ability, but it was intimidated by Luo Nan's command. It couldn't directly devour her, so it used a roundabout method in an attempt to use this ability to obtain benefits. The human-faced arachnid wanted to reach a dynamic equilibrium with Ruei-1. It had been attacking and oppressing all this time, but it controlled the intensity of the fire. It tempered Ruei-1's stellar sword edge to become even sharper, all for the sake of allowing Ruei-1 to truly threaten it. This sounded very strange, but the truth was that the human-faced arachnid was incapable of achieving self-growth. It needed to devour foreign objects, including its own kind, in order to achieve individual evolution. The current situation was just a variant of devouring. The human-faced arachnid borrowed Ruei-1's stellar sword edge to chop off its shaky parts and reconstruct its foundation. As long as it wasn't truly fatal, it would gladly endure the pain even if it was riddled with 1,000 holes and its limbs flew in all directions. As for the vitality it consumed, it was naturally provided by the idiotic pigs and goats in the surroundings. The only ones that were completely damaged here were these people. This form was brimming with a sense of malevolence and bitterness. It was incomparably compatible with the human-faced arachnid's usual image. From the human-faced arachnid's perspective, this special environment that it had created with its own hands was a whetstone, a furnace, and an altar. It had placed itself on the altar. Ruei-1 was the one who received the greatest benefits from this. Luo Nan still didn't know what ability Ruei-1 had awakened to in the end. But he knew that the human-faced arachnid had an astonishing potential when he saw its miserable appearance. But in order to stimulate this potential, one must not be disturbed by external objects. One must have a clear and penetrating mental state. Only then could one withstand the turbulent turbid flow and remain untainted by even a speck of dust despite being scoured 100 times or 1,000 times. Therefore Ruei-1 was also on the altar. The human-faced arachnid was using her and vice versa. The two used each other and polished each other to push their own level all the way to higher levels. Even now they still couldn't see the upper limit. Such a scene might not be completely real, but it was a part that Luo Nan could understand and extrapolate. The overall composition of the scene was faintly connected to the visualization diagram he was most accustomed to. Ruei-1 and the human-faced arachnid occupied the most core positions. They could be said to be inscribed spheres, representing a kind of endlessly circulating internal power. The fighting arena was the boundary of the sealed diagram. It was the external sphere, representing the external environment and energy supply. As for the tetrahedron, wasn't that Luo Nan? The human-faced arachnid was within Luo Nan's system. All of its actions were essentially variations and extensions of the system. So in the end, the one who provided this framework was Luo Nan himself. This realization rose in Luo Nan's mind, and he suddenly understood where the consumption of observation had gone. That was the price and challenge that must be paid as a carrier. He wasn't standing on the altar, but he was the altar. Whether or not Luo Nan's format pyramid could accommodate the endlessly rising levels of both sides, whether or not it could bear the conflicting power of both sides, whether or not it could provide sufficient support, was the key to the success or failure of this sacrificial ritual. Once the framework collapsed, the balance would be lost. Either Ruewen would kill the human-faced arachnid, or the human-faced arachnid would destroy Ruewen. There was no third possibility. Even if Ruewen died, it didn't mean that the human-faced arachnid had gone against Luo Nan's will. This was because the entire framework had failed. Of course, Luo Nan would certainly suffer the backlash of the framework's collapse at that time. He didn't know what would happen when that time came. Human-faced arachnid. Luo Nan gnashed his teeth. Right at this moment, a spotlight suddenly shone down from above the fighting stage, illuminating the edge of the area. The live DJ played the whistling sound of an airplane skimming through the air at a low altitude. A long wait, a bloody future. The Beast King battle that everyone is looking forward to. Our other protagonist has arrived. The ending sound was a moaning sigh. It was a pretentious posture, but it gently plucked a chord in the hearts of all the spectators. The whistling sound that followed caused the entire fighting arena to shake. Chapter 122. Where the spotlights shone, the ground first sank, then rose up again, and a huge metal box appeared above it. Before it had completely entered the range of the spotlights, they could hear the sound of friction and collision. It was very strange. The metal box was the size of a small container. Its length was close to 6 meters, and its height and width were also more than 2 meters. Compared to the standard boxing ring, its length was very close. When this metal box appeared in front of everyone, the fighting arena was first stifled, and then the shouts from the stands turned into boos and laughter. F***ck big guy. This physique, is it a brown bear? A Siberian tiger? A black caiman? Shameless enough, vicious enough. Continue to raise the stakes? Can we change the bet? Clearly, the fighting arena's actions had caused some controversy, but most people were still happy to see it happen. They didn't care about the outcome of the bet, they just wanted to see that bloody scene. Of course, it would be better if there was a bit of suspense. A one-sided situation ultimately made people feel that something was missing. At this time, the front of the metal box opened, but nothing came out. Instead, there was a loud ong-ong sound as well as the sound of an excited collision. The force was not small, but the sound, just as the group of people looked at each other, the entire metal box opened, revealing the situation inside. The audience was stunned. Inside the metal box, there were actually 2 cages about the same size. One was a dark, translucent glass box, and it was impossible to see what was inside. The other was an ordinary-looking iron cage. The fellow running around inside had a long face and tusks, a thick body, thick skin, and iron bones. It was indeed a huge creature, and its strength was not small either, knocking against the iron cage with clanging sounds. This was a wild boar. Alright, from a practical point of view, if 99% of the people in the fighting arena were thrown down and made to face this beast that weighed more than a few hundred kilograms, there would only be death. But the style was not right. What they wanted to see was a shuraba with flesh and blood flying everywhere, not a farce of people chasing each other and bumping into each other. Besides, was any wild boar worthy of making them wait for more than 10 minutes? Boos rang out. It didn't matter which company's boss or which department's official they were during the day. At this moment, all the spectators and gamblers on the stands had completely thrown away their reservations and vented their emotions to their heart's content. Whoever they didn't like, they would boo and scold. Amidst the deafening boos, the DJ did not dare to make a sound. On the boxing stage, Ruewen still stood quietly with her eyes closed. Below the boxing ring, the front of the black glass box next to the iron cage silently opened. The box was still pitch black and didn't reveal anything. However, the wild boar that had been restless in the iron cage on the other side suddenly screeched, as if someone had stabbed a butcher's knife into its stomach. The boos in the arena were forcibly cut off by this ear-piercing cry, and then the crowd of spectators saw the wild boar in the cage desperately trying to get out. The collision was so fierce that it actually caused the entire iron cage to shift. The two parallel boxes were forcibly pulled apart by almost 3 meters until they crashed into the boxing ring. They continued to exert force, causing the boxing ring to rumble. What the hell? Luonan was a bit annoyed and a bit anxious. The sacrificial ritual had reached a critical moment. Countless lines appeared within the burning sea of clouds, building an even more exquisite structure. It was created by the human-faced arachnid's valiant instincts. Profound and unfathomable laws and principles were contained within. Luonan didn't try to analyze it. The human-faced arachnid surpassed him in terms of level. There was no meaning in forcefully deciphering it. The only thing he could do right now was to maintain the framework of the sacrificial altar, to make it maintain stability. He was doing quite well right now, and the two people on the sacrificial altar were doing quite well as well. The play of tricks in the fighting arena just now had caused the supply of turbid emotions to be a bit scattered. That wasn't a big deal. Blindly using a fierce fire might not be able to cook rice. The slower the fire, the better the cooking would be. This bunch of idiots, pigs and sheep. They were simply hammering nails into their own coffins. But at this time, the wild boar crazily rammed into the boxing ring, and the interference from the outside world suddenly increased. The human-faced arachnid wasn't a big deal, but Luonan was really worried that Ruewen would get distracted. While Luonan was worried, the crowd of spectators were in high spirits. Oh, what a trick. Deliberately setting up suspense and suppressing one's desires had been used many times. This was what the spectators loved the most. Their minds were firmly hooked, and the sounds of booing and cursing completely disappeared. The fighting arena actually became quite a bit quieter. Something finally came out from the black glass box at this time. A long forked tongue stuck to the ground. It flickered in and out, and trillions of sensory cells replaced the functions of eyes and nose on its rough surface to detect the outside environment. Snake or lizard? Hurry up and start. Hurry up and show your head. It seemed to feel the restless emotions of the outside world. The thing in the glass box finally stuck its long and narrow head out. It looked to be of the lizard type. But the spectators felt that something was wrong halfway through. This head was nearly 2 meters long, right? Its head was mainly occupied by a long, narrow, and deep gaping mouth. Its front end was practically reaching the iron cage beneath the boxing ring. The pitiful wild boar was about to bring the cage and jump onto the stage. The length of the body was calculated from the length of the head. How could the glass box hold it? In reality, the flexible body that seemed to be swimming in the air extended out a full 4 meters in length. There was still a tail that hadn't come out yet. The mouth occupied half the length of the body that was revealed. This made its external appearance look closer to that of a crocodile, but it was much taller. Its 4 limbs were extremely thick and solid, supporting its belly far off the ground. Its forked tongue still hung down, sticking to the ground as it flicked in and out. It looked strange and cautious. What was this thing? Just as Luonan was puzzled, Cragburst let out a low roar. "See him be!" Before the coarse curses could fall, the monster's 2-meter-long mouth opened wide without any warning. Thousands of dense, cold and sharp teeth lined up in 4 rows. The camera faithfully recorded the scene, and a close-up shot was made through the broadcast screen. The scene was clearly displayed before everyone's eyes. The entire arena sucked in a breath of cold air. Protruding forward, biting, closing, swallowing. The monster performed a series of concise movements like this, and a glaring bloody light sprayed out in front of it. The wild boar that weighed several hundred kilograms, including the solid iron cage that surrounded it, was suddenly cut in half. It was swallowed by the monster in one gulp. Screams rang out from all directions. A rare situation of half being quiet and half being hysterical appeared in the entire fighting arena. And at this time, the enormous broadcast screen above the fighting arena was retracted, causing the area above the fighting arena to be even more spacious. Then a maglev-type floating platform descended from the opening in the upper level of the fighting arena. There were no handrails, nor were there any fences. Jack stood steadily atop the platform. He wore a white shirt, black trousers and a black bow tie. He was the standard attire of a referee, but he looked down from above. His face was expressionless, and he turned a blind eye to the strange situation in the fighting arena. He raised his hands slightly and separated them to 2 sides. One side represented Ruewen, who was standing silently. The other side represented the brutal monster that was swallowing its food. He spoke with a calm and emotionless tone. "Marauder Ruewen. Mutant, Great Maw Basilisk. Beast King battle begin." Mutant? Was it really a freaking mutant? Chapter 123. Oh, damn it. Whose idea was this? I love him to death. Hurry up and start. Start. Don't tell me I have to wait for it to finish eating that pig and bring an iron cage? Look. Those 4 rows of sharp teeth. What would it feel like to have a slender body roll around inside? Ah. Who's going to give me a close-up? You on the stage. You on the stage. Open your eyes. What a cute baby. The so-called Beast King battle didn't immediately begin, but the spectators in the fighting arena were all brimming with interest. When the fighting arena brought out the mutant as the main character of this battle, everyone knew that the course of the battle would be completely one-sided. They could only enjoy the prelude and the conclusion. Right now, Ruewen continued to stand quietly with her eyes closed. This was already the best posture to maintain suspense. Some people were really worried that this flat-chested witch would witness the terror of the great maw basilisk with her own eyes. This fight would turn into a hunting show for the mutant early on. CDMB. CDMB. Cragburst spat out obscenities as he extended his hand to touch the transparent protective wall in front of him. Right now he had to break through this obstacle in order to rescue Ruewen from the jaws of the mutant. Giving him 8 to 10 punches was obviously not a problem, but this required a process. If by any chance the great maw basilisk's vicious nature was aroused, then even 10,000 deaths wouldn't be enough to redeem himself. Cragburst was regretting right now. Why didn't he put a stop to this damned road of adjudication earlier? Why did such a dangerous situation occur? Cragburst quickly calculated a few times and confirmed that he needed at least 5 to 7 punches in order to blast open the protective wall. And this was under the premise that the fighting arena's defensive power didn't interfere. The uncertainty was too high. He needed to obtain support. Scout. I need a bit of time. Cragburst had just spoken when a small map that was clearly drawn at the last minute was sent over from the psychic wave network. It clearly drew a route from his current location to a certain area in the upper levels. Luonan's voice transmitted over, "Don't force your way in. Enter from the VIP room. That's where Jack just came from. It's the only shortcut. You still have time. This damned lizard will finish digesting its food. The great maw basilisk only needs 2 minutes to digest its food. Then 2 minutes it is. If it's not enough, then I'll take it." Cragburst didn't say anything else. He turned around and left. Right now he could only choose to believe in his teammate, and Luonan's previous performance was worthy of his trust. Cragburst had just walked into the lounge when Jack's gaze swept over from the skies above the fighting arena. This minute movement was undoubtedly exposed by Luonan's mental senses. Luonan's mind jolted, but he recalled the most important information. He rushed to warn Cragburst, "Pay attention. Jack has discovered you. He's a burner. It has a kind of controlling magnetic field, and its strength is not to be underestimated." Understood. Cragburst was very surprised, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he sped up and ran wildly through the hallway. The mafia guards had spotted him, but no one could stop his assault. Jack, who was on the maglev platform, must have received the relevant information. However, his face was still cold and expressionless. This guy. Luonan had heard Jack talk to his contact about the little darling of Mr. Ma's family. Luonan had thought that Jack was some sort of ferocious beast. He never thought that Jack would actually be so ruthless and shameless to this extent. A mutant. The current situation was much more dangerous than what Cragburst had observed. The human-faced arachnid and Ruewen continued to maintain a cruel and fragile balance because the sacrificial ritual was still ongoing. Even though the level of the two sides was pushed higher, Luonan didn't know when this would end. As long as the sacrificial ritual wasn't over, Ruewen wouldn't be able to free herself to face the enemy. The instant collapse of the balance would take her life a step earlier. Right now, the person who was working the hardest in the fighting arena was Luonan. He had to maintain the entire framework of the altar from collapsing. He also had to pay attention to the changes in the situation. He had to guide Cragburst's path in time. He also had to lock onto Jack and keep a close eye on the great maw basilisk to prevent any new abnormal movements from occurring. Multitasking. Panoramic mental senses transmitted information from all directions in parallel, forcing him to deal with it. A single mishap could lead to a complete collapse. He didn't know that he was an omniscient god, but he was doing the work of a god. The great maw basilisk's meal was nearing its end. It had swallowed the other half of the wild boar and the iron cage in a short few dozen seconds. Its enormous belly was about to touch the ground, but then it flattened at a speed visible to the eye. The strong acid in its stomach possessed a terrifying digestive ability. The several 100-kilogram wild boar and at least half of the iron cage's weight were digested by the great maw basilisk in a short minute. The relevant energy was infused into the great maw basilisk's entire body, increasing the temperature of the blood by a bit. At this time, its thick double eyelids lifted up. Dark yellow cracks of ice appeared on its enormous eyeballs. It gave people the feeling that it was callous and emotionless. It assessed its surroundings. From the great maw basilisk's perspective, what it hated the most were the noisemakers all around it. But it had already used its tail to test the protective wall during the process of eating. It wasn't easy to break through. In that case, it would give up the hard and make it easy. It would first devour the simple target. This was its only choice. The great maw basilisk stared at its target on the fighting stage. Its long tongue stuck to the ground and sniffed, digging out deeper information. This slender creature actually possessed a certain level of threat. As an apex predator, this was a situation that it absolutely couldn't allow. The great maw basilisk's underdeveloped vocal cords didn't have the ability to raise its voice and roar. But the low growling sound it produced was enough. When the low and deep sound waves spread through the loudspeaker and spread throughout the entire arena, the close-up shots of its icy cold pupils were transmitted to every broadcast screen. The spectators' hearts palpitated for a moment before they excitedly stood up one after another. They raised their arms and shouted, "Adjudicate! Adjudicate! Adjudicate!" The atmosphere in the arena was about to explode. Not for anything else but for the special term mutant. In the 30 years after the Third World War, mutants had always occupied the top position of the Earth's food chain. They had firmly trampled the original overlords, humans, beneath their feet. The wilderness, the oceans, and even parts of the air had all become their domain. The entire world's population exceeded 10 billion, and they were squeezed into 88 large metropolitan areas. For a time they were in imminent danger. Even if the present humans developed the deep blue walkers, changed their tactics and continuously obtained battle results, they still wouldn't dare to say that they had completely entered the strategic counteroffensive phase. Recovering lost territory could only be called a distant goal. This was the spiritual memory that mutants gave to the people of the present generation, especially the generation after the war. At this very moment, the bloody scene in the center of the fighting arena caused the spectators to feel fear. But the layout of the fighting arena and its powerful defenses gave them positive hints. They were the true masters of the fighting arena. They were the powerful ones who enjoyed everything. The stimulation brought about by this unique position of dominance was something that no other ferocious beast could ever hope to achieve. This illusory power and dominant position caused the flames in the spectators' hearts to burst forth in an even more intense manner. The people in the back row stood up, and the spectators in the front row crowded forward. They squeezed against the transparent protective wall, striving to get a closer look at the great maw basilisk's savage appearance. Luo Nan coldly swept his gaze over this chaotic scene. Even though these spectators were the largest source of noise, they were the most insignificant group within the structure of the altar. Who would pay attention to pigs and sheep that were about to run out of blood? But a subtle change appeared at this very moment. Everyone stood up and shouted crazily. There were some people who weren't able to truly stand up. Chapter 124. No one discovered the abnormality here. Everyone's gazes were focused on the fighting stage, appreciating the fight that was destined to end quickly. The first one. Luo Nan's energy could no longer be divided at this time. He didn't have the strength nor the need to lament over the fading of life. He only sensed that a certain marvelous element was born within the altar as this person's flame of life burned out. The element content was too minute. He couldn't see any obvious changes. But with the first one there was a second, a third, and many more. The relevant numbers within the range of his mental senses increased without end. The accumulation of the marvelous element didn't increase. It was like the ratio of a certain pigment. It changed from light to intense. This was the color of death. The blood would eventually run dry. The blood was cut open at the same time. Then the corresponding death of exhaustion would arrive at about the same time. The one who collapsed right now was just the first wave. Luo Nan had never thought of killing anyone, just like how he didn't think of saving anyone at this moment. He needed to focus on the framework of the altar. He needed to focus on the subtle changes brought about by the infiltration of the new element. The death of each individual was a challenge to the supply of the burning cloud of fire. However, looking at the overall structure, the addition of the death paint formed a complementary situation where one side was weakened while the other side was strengthened. The latter couldn't provide energy, but it built a new structure within the framework. It was like a bridge, leading the sacrificer to a plane that had never been reached before. From the frenzy of life to the deep silence of death. Whether it was the human-faced arachnid Ruewen or even Luonan, they all touched upon this straightforward and deep domain. Luonan was a bit spellbound. The pressure of information that was about to clog suddenly erased a bit within this deep silence of death. A lot of information had value on the plane of life, but it was meaningless once it entered the domain of death. The blending of life and death was like a filter. It filtered out many things. This could be considered a type of comprehension, but it was only at a very shallow level. Especially when compared to Ruewen. When the domain of death opened up to them, Luonan discovered that Ruewen possessed an inconceivable keenness towards this domain. Her keenness far surpassed Luonan's and the human-faced arachnid's degree. Every drop of life was able to bring her new harvests. Luonan vaguely felt as if Ruewen had come to his side. She stood side by side with him as she watched the flames of life extinguish, disintegrate, and evolve on all four sides of the stands. She obtained information that he was unable to comprehend from within. But from another perspective, Luonan was originally unable to discover this information. But because of Ruewen's existence, he was able to come into contact with this information in advance. He didn't know what use this had, but one thing was clear: Ruewen had discovered and utilized the power of death. This was something that the human-faced arachnid was incapable of doing. Because of this, the balance at the center of the altar was suddenly broken. Ruewen and the human-faced arachnid continued to increase in rank. However, the current situation was that Ruewen would advance 2 ranks for every rank the human-faced arachnid advanced. In just a few breaths of time, the internal force that sharpened and pushed each other forward was on the verge of collapse. The rules of the sacrificial ceremony were: whoever became the weaker would become the sacrificial offering. The human-faced arachnid let out an ear-piercing screech. This was the situation it had created. It had placed itself on the altar, but in the end, it had become a sacrifice. But its survival instincts drove it to struggle. Even if it was destined to perish, it didn't want to be the first. Luonan watched this scene. He watched the burning cloud of fire grow more and more clamorous. He watched the spectators in the fighting arena shout like a tsunami. He also watched the sharp edge of the starry sky illuminate the gloom, and he watched the spider demon struggle in its death throes. Inexplicably, he didn't have any fluctuations of emotion. It was as if he was watching a pantomime that had nothing to do with him. Or perhaps it was just a formula that was arranged and calculated on the surface of a paper. It wasn't that he had lost the ability to feel emotions. Rather, he simply didn't have the luxury to display his emotions. Maintaining the framework of the altar had already overdrawn all of his energy. Cragburst's transmission came at this time. "Scout. I've arrived at the VIP room. Holy crap. It's a giant lizard." The great maw basilisk began to move. It slowly turned to an angle and determined the optimal path to hunt. According to its habits, it was about to launch an attack immediately. Cragburst just so happened to rush into the VIP room. He knocked out the contact who was about to scream in shock. He saw everything that was happening in the arena from that angle and he gave a loud warning. "Speed up. Don't get distracted." Luonan's message was calm and peaceful to the extreme. Cragburst was clearly stifled, but he still listened to Luonan's words. He crashed into the secret passageway of the VIP room and made a mad dash towards Jack's location. Luonan didn't pay special attention to the great maw basilisk's movements. This was because his mind was unable to bear the heavy burden at this moment. It had already automatically adjusted itself to be divided into 2 parts, within the framework and outside the framework. The former was primary. The latter was secondary. The priority was undoubtedly to resolve the situation within the framework. As for outside the framework, then he would resolve it within the framework. This was truly a marvelous dichotomy. Luonan's thoughts stirred, and the heavily chained crow hummed with a trembling hum. It crossed the air and headed straight for the great maw basilisk. Luonan didn't know if he could control this mutant. His goal wasn't set that high. All he did was use his own unique method to pull what was outside the framework into the framework. As for entering the framework, who knew if he would become a priest or a sacrificial offering? The great maw basilisk moved. The surrounding spectators screamed themselves hoarse. Its four thick and solid limbs moved quickly, and it easily stepped onto the meter-tall fighting stage. Its enormous body swam through the air, and its enormous mouth, which could bite through steel, split open as it charged towards Ruewen. Luonan watched all of this coldly. The heavily chained crow had already pierced through the great maw basilisk's head. The marvelous connection was completed. From his perspective, the great maw basilisk wasn't pouncing towards Ruewen. It was pouncing towards the framework of his altar. It wasn't a collision. It was just a leap. The plane of reality, the mental plane, and the rendering of emotions. Everything interweaved into one place. His altar's framework was truly connected to every plane, towering majestically. Ruewen still didn't open her eyes, but she clearly sensed it. She staggered her feet and dodged to the limit in this crucial moment. She dodged to the front of the great maw basilisk's charge. Anyone would dodge when faced with the charge of a high-speed truck. The spectators weren't disappointed. It's good that she dodged. It's exciting when there's a back and forth. The cheers from the spectators were like a landslide and a tsunami. But amidst this roar, a weak hissing sound inexplicably penetrated into everyone's ears. The great maw basilisk and Ruewen's body staggered. Its enormous body was nearly the same length as the fighting stage. Perhaps it had charged too quickly, but it lost some control. It was unable to stop itself after landing on the ground. It directly leaped over the fighting stage. It actually stumbled and stumbled as it charged straight towards the spectators behind it. They watched the terrifying mutant charge towards them. They clearly knew that it was impossible for the great maw basilisk to crash into the protective wall, but the spectators closer to the fighting stage, especially the beauties who were responsible for creating the atmosphere, still screamed in a half-real, half-fake manner. But halfway there, the screams became hysterical. The body of the enormous beast, which was over 5 meters long and weighed over 800 kilograms, was black and heavy like steel. Everyone could see it wither at a speed that could be seen by the naked eye. It suddenly shrunk by a size. The bones that supported its body also lost their hardness. Its four limbs broke one after the other. It simply slid on the ground and crashed into the protective wall with a bang. It didn't struggle. The callous pupils behind its enormous eyelids had already been corroded into two enormous black holes. The great maw basilisk lay paralyzed on the ground. In only 2 or 3 breaths of time, its back, neck, head, chest, and abdomen, large chunks of flesh fell off one after another. In the blink of an eye, all that was left was a dense skeleton wrapped in blood vessels and connective tissue. Defeat and death were presented before everyone's eyes in the most bizarre and cruel form. Chapter 125. In the face of sudden stimulation that exceeded the limits of endurance, screaming was perhaps the only way for people to breathe before they suffocated. The exclamations and screams formed a chaotic hurricane that swept through the entire arena. There were more than 5 spectators on the viewing platform directly opposite the great maw basilisk. They couldn't withstand this wave of impact, and their eyes rolled back as they fell to the ground. At this time, the phenomenon of collapsing was no longer an exception. More and more people noticed it, and more people were infected. The arena was equipped with medical personnel, but the incessant cries for help made the limited medical personnel at a loss as to what to do. And when these fragments of information were gathered together, a clear scale was revealed, and a bone-piercing chill descended upon the arena. A shiver ran through everyone. Luonan calmly looked down at all of this. In his eyes, death covered life. More and more information lost its meaning, and the framework structure of the altar grew clearer and clearer because of this. To put it bluntly, when the great maw basilisk was led into the altar's frame, regardless of whether it was inside or outside the frame, the entire situation suddenly became clear. Under the framework of the altar, the great maw basilisk's killing intent directly constituted a challenge to Ruewen. On the material plane, the great maw basilisk's fleshly body was very powerful. It was completely at the level of a running heavy truck. Moreover, it possessed extraordinary flexibility and destructive power. However, on the mental plane, this fellow could only be considered to be at the level of an intelligent beast. On the current level of the altar, there was an insurmountable distance between him and Ruewen and the human-faced arachnid. Then, as a matter of course, the great maw basilisk was reduced to a target for slaughter. It was also an excellent scapegoat. The human-faced arachnid's struggles were effective. At the juncture of life and death, it practically slaughtered its way into the great maw basilisk's body along with Ruewen's star edge. The abundant life force of blood, qi, and blood became the best shield and substitute for the human-faced arachnid. The strong pressure that had been accumulating all this time, the iron rules of the sacrificial offerings that were almost certain to die, were all pushed in together and carried by the Great Maw Basilisk. At this moment, the Great Maw Basilisk was the converging point of all the backlash energy. The human-faced arachnid was able to preserve its little life. Even though it had suffered a crushing defeat in the end and had been chopped down a level, it had still made great progress with the addition and subtraction. The only worry was that he was extremely weak and couldn't maintain his demonic body anymore, so he turned back into a demonic symbol to recuperate. The rule of the altar was that the winner takes all. Without a doubt, Ruewen was the one who benefited the most from the entire sacrificial ceremony. The instant the Great Maw Basilisk stepped onto the altar, Ruewen's star radiated the most resplendent rays of light. Destroying one's soul and destroying one's physical body were two completely different levels. There was no difference between them. However, in order to destroy both the soul and the physical body at the same time, the only way was to simultaneously interfere with both the physical and mental domains and break through the invisible barrier between the two. Ruewen had done it. At this time she slowly opened her eyes. Her pupils were still serene and silent, but she only stood there. Her even breathing carried a clanging sound. As for the mental plane, the turbulent burning clouds formed pieces of emptiness. But on the other hand, those empty silhouettes were like death gods that had stepped out of the void and raised their sides high. As the sole victor on the sacrificial altar, Ruewen's star dominated everything. Wherever the radiance of the stars shone, she only needed a thought to squeeze out every last bit of value from the sacrificial pigs and sheep within the framework, turning them into deathly stillness. At present, the only obstacle was probably the speed at which Ruewen was able to comprehend the information within. Luonan was probably the only person who could stop Ruewen, as long as he was determined to dismantle this framework. But the corresponding backlash and the price he would have to pay made it so that he didn't have such thoughts at all. What he was doing right now was to observe the subsequent developments and changes. Unfortunately, the sealed ceiling above the fighting arena exploded open with a rumble a few seconds later. Wood shards, glass shards, and even steel fragments filled the sky. This caused quite a few spectators who had already sunk into a fragile state of mind to immediately pass over. Cragburst had rushed over. But at this moment, the sound of his chin hitting the ground was even clearer than the momentum he created. My God, her ability has awakened. It's at least B rank or higher. Cragburst was clearly distracted because of Ruewen's awakening. He even forgot about the most dangerous person below him. Luonan never gave up on monitoring Jack. He immediately gave a warning, stop him. Jack merely shot a glance at the sky from the maglev referee stage. Then his figure tilted and he suddenly flew down. His target was none other than Ruewen on the fighting stage. On the fighting stage, Ruewen also aimed her gaze at Jack. The third battle of the Road of Adjudication? No, that senseless gimmick had already ended. There weren't enough people in the entire fighting arena who could endure that atmosphere. Jack understood this point very well, so he didn't make any gaudy displays. He directly activated the deep CEM field that gave Luonan an incomparable headache. Reality proved that the deep CEM field's effect on the material plane was quite considerable. The fighting stage, which had just been heavily stomped by the Great Maw Basilisk, couldn't bear it any longer. The central region warped and collapsed. Then the entire ground caved in. The collapse of the fighting stage and the effect of the deep CEM field affected Ruewen's balance. She used a set of small steps to adjust herself, dodging the frontal assault of Jack in passing. Stepping barefoot on the rubble of the fighting stage didn't seem to affect her too much. But then a muffled explosion rang out. The floor beneath the fighting stage exploded with a bang, sending fragments flying everywhere. Aside from Jack, this exceeded everyone's expectations. Even Luonan, who possessed all-encompassing perception, didn't notice that there was an explosive device buried in the floor beneath the fighting arena. Why the hell was this prepared for this scene? Ruewen's figure fell down unavoidably. If this was the Ruewen from before the Beast King battle, she could only wait until she landed before making adjustments. But the current Ruewen was already completely different. She raised her hand during the process of falling. There seemed to be no signs of exerting force at all, but a hissing sound rang out amidst the chaotic scattering of fragments in the air. All the gravel and wood along the way were sliced in half, and an extremely sharp stream of air headed straight for the diving Jack. Jack reacted quickly. He raised his right arm and heard a muffled sound. The sleeve of his shirt was torn apart. His skin split open and blood spurted out, but there was no blood at all. A metallic luster flashed beneath the layer of flesh. Jack's right arm was a part of his body's transformation. The outside was wrapped in a layer of artificial flesh, and the inside was made of an extremely hard alloy. Right now, the layer of artificial flesh could be seen corroding and withering at a visible speed. The color of the alloy underneath was a bit dim. Highly corrosive. No, it's an even purer power. The glow of Jack's bionic eyes grew stronger as he stared fixedly at Rue Wen's face. A recording device buried deep within his body was recording and transmitting key information. Chapter 126. The area below the fighting stage was a sealed elevator platform. Even further below was the cargo passageway. The Great Maw Basilisk had been transported here through this passageway before being lifted into the fighting arena. The elevator platform had already started moving at this time. It moved down at a very fast speed. Rue Wen landed steadily on the ground. Her slender yet sturdy body immediately exerted strength to launch an attack against Jack, who hadn't yet stabilized his footing. She was more confident than ever that she could kill this callous adjudicator head-on. But then a short beep rang out from an unknown place. Rue Wen's eyes suddenly widened as a powerful electric current exploded from a certain location within her chest. It instantly bombarded her internal organs and spread to her forelimbs and head. The electric current passed through her nervous system and stimulated her muscles, instantly sending Rue Wen into a rigid state. Her body instantly lost balance and she fell straight toward Jack. "Baby, let's go home." Jack didn't feel the slightest bit surprised. He extended his hand and scooped Rue Wen up. But soon his brows furrowed as a sharp chill pierced into his skin. Even his internal organs felt a bit cold. Rue Wen's awakened ability still existed even though she had suffered an unexpected heavy injury. The skin and flesh below Jack's ribs shriveled and fell off in an instant, revealing half of his sternum constructed from alloy plates. Jack only furrowed his brows in response to this. Another pulse exploded from the depths of Rue Wen's brain in the next moment. This time, it truly erased all of her ability to counterattack and erased her consciousness. Holy crap. Cragburst was only a second late, but he could only watch helplessly as Rue Wen fell into the enemy's hands. He struck out with a fist under his great fury. The sealed elevator platform rumbled and the surface of the platform shook. How could he have known that Jack's face was expressionless? He grabbed the unconscious Rue Wen's legs and swept her over, startling Cragburst into a rush of strength. The upper portion of the cargo passageway was already exposed on one side of the elevator platform. Jack didn't wait for Rue Wen to land. He already grabbed Rue Wen and jumped down. Cragburst didn't even think as he chased after them. But just as he entered the passageway, he saw Jack raise his handgun. Jack pulled the trigger and a rumble exploded within the half-sealed passageway. Unexpectedly, this was a sonic bomb. Cragburst let out a muffled groan as the strengthened sound wave shook his brain. His feet were in a mess and signs of a concussion had already appeared. Jack wasn't troubled by this. The special structure of his brain allowed him to quickly adjust. But he didn't linger and just ran wildly through the passageway while holding Rue Wen. Luonan asked, "Are you okay?" Cragburst didn't utter a word. He crawled up and chased after him. At first it was a little shaky, but then it returned to normal. The freight channel could carry containers, so it was very spacious. Usually it also carried some shady goods. At the end of the passageway there were garages on both sides. A group of gangsters in the passageway were oblivious to what had happened in the combat arena. They were gathered together, laughing and playing a large-scale AR game. The female protagonist in the game was almost broken by them. The tunnel was filled with moans and yells. Some people felt that this was not enough and began to call the real person. However, this freight channel was still relatively remote, so the other party needed to send out a car to pick it up. The caller could only get up while cursing. He was ready to pick a car from the garage and return quickly. However, before he could even stand up straight, the metal doors of the 6 garages on both sides of the passageway opened at the same time. Identity checks, passwords, and other safety measures were all skipped. The lights of the 4-wheeled heavy trucks in the garage lit up one after another. The glaring krypton gas lamps illuminated the group of people in the middle of the passageway in a daze. They were immediately blinded. Then the rumbling sounds of the vehicles starting up rang out. The group of semi-blind people were all qualified old drivers. They were scared out of their wits when they heard the change in the sound of the engines. The AI is out of control. Run. It was unknown who shouted, but they didn't care about the consequences. They turned around and ran. They had no choice but to run. They were right in the middle of the passageway when the 4 heavy trucks drove out. A single mishap and they would be crushed to death. The unmanned heavy trucks started up practically at the same time. Some were fast and some were slow. They utilized the space in the passageway to the greatest limit. They used the most efficient method to drive out of the garage in the shortest amount of time. They lined up in 2 rows and sped out. They didn't care about any obstacles they encountered during this process. The group of people ran towards the back of the passageway. Aside from 2 unlucky fellows who were scraped by the corners of the vehicles, they were more scared than hurt. But the sound of heavy footsteps could be heard at this time. Their dusky and blurred vision gradually became clear. They saw a person who shouldn't have appeared here, Jack. Mr. Jack. Jack ignored their existence. He carried a person under his ribs and ran with large strides. His speed was truly fast. He caught up to the 4 accelerating heavy trucks in the blink of an eye. He chose the one at the very front and jumped onto the roof of the truck while carrying the person. That kind of inhuman jumping ability made the group of people dumbfounded. F***ck off. Cragburst swept past like a tempest. He saw Jack's movements from afar and wanted to catch up. But when he tried to pass through the 2 heavy trucks behind him, the 2 unmanned trucks moved inwards at the same time. They wanted to squeeze him to death. Cragburst cursed loudly. He also displayed his inhuman jumping ability and jumped onto the roof of the 4-meter-tall truck. But before he could steady himself, the heavy truck under his feet came to a sudden stop. The powerful inertia threw him to the front of the truck. The other truck that had been driving side by side suddenly turned horizontally and rammed towards Cragburst. In the end, Cragburst didn't excel in agility. He was hit head-on in midair with a bang and was forcefully swept towards the side wall of the tunnel. The heavy truck chased after him and rammed. A rumble rang out as the truck smashed into the side wall of the tunnel. What the hell? Cragburst managed to roll in time and extricate himself from under the truck's wheels. The 2 heavy trucks had been turned into 2 heavy weapons by Jack. Even though they didn't deal any substantial damage to Cragburst's coarse skin and thick flesh, they seriously hindered Cragburst's pursuit. By the time Cragburst got up and started chasing, he could only see the taillights of the 2 heavy trucks ahead. Cragburst's face was ashen. He gritted his teeth and continued to run madly. But the 2 heavy trucks ahead had already driven out of the tunnel at this time. Looking at the headlights, one was driving left and one was driving right. Cragburst's scalp went numb. He didn't have the time to look at Jack's movements just now. God knows which truck Jack took Ruewen and ran away in? Scout. Just as the call came out from the psychic wave network, the sound of flapping wings could be heard above his head. Ink, who had run off to God knows where, streaked over his head to guide the route. Luonan used the hexaear to transmit, "It's the one on the right. It's heading out of the city. You need a means of transportation. Jack has the ability to control all information devices. You can only choose the non-intelligent model?" F***ck. How can there be non-intelligent models nowadays? Bicycles? The motorcycle you drove over here is pretty good. There's one here too. Make it turn. Goods yard area. 70 meters to the right. Cragburst didn't hesitate at all. He madly sprinted all the way to the location Luonan spoke of and sent the 2 gangsters flying. He snatched the motorcycle and shot out like an arrow, chasing with all his might. It was said that sharpening one's axe wouldn't delay the work of cutting firewood. Gangsters loved to modify high-powered motorcycles the most. Though they were electrically powered, they could casually reach speeds of 200 kilometers per hour on good roads. Cragburst still remembered the limitations of Luonan's spirit-attached crow. He growled, "Leave the rest to me." Ah. Aleph *ck Jack's 8 generations of ancestors. The motorcycle rumbled as it charged out of the tunnel. It drove onto the shabby road. The taillights of the heavy truck could still be seen at this time. The head-on strong winds let out a rumble. Cragburst used his powerful arm strength to ensure the stability of the front of the motorcycle. He directly turned the throttle to the bottom. But at this time, an omen suddenly sprouted in his mind. Luonan's warning cut in at the same time. Above? Fuck. Luonan cursed in a rarely seen manner. The dark red tail of flames cut over his head and connected with the road ahead. A fiercely expanding fireball appeared before Cragburst's eyes. The powerful shockwave and the terrifying raging flames instantly engulfed him. Chapter 127. Target A's vehicle destroyed. His vital signs fluctuated greatly. The wingless aircraft, painted black and without any obvious markings, flew past at a low altitude. Its electronic eyes locked onto the blazing area below. Switch to lock-on mode. Second attack confirmed. Beep. The warning signal was formed, and the wingless aircraft abruptly lifted up, but it was still a step too late. The roar sounded. Within the raging flames on the dilapidated road, a ball of flame light suddenly split out. Under the pressure of the powerful force, it condensed like a fiery meteor, leaping into the sky. The wingless aircraft made an evasive maneuver, but it wasn't able to completely evade the attack. Flames exploded as well, and the alloy structure instantly distorted as it plummeted to the ground. Crag burst madly shouted as he charged out of the raging flames. His sturdy body was wrapped in a layer of fiery light. The clothes on his body had already been burned clean, and his hair and eyebrows had also been scorched by the high temperature. However, no matter how the flames burned, there was an invisible barrier between them and his skin. Because of this, his skin was roasted red by the high temperature, but not a single spark stuck to his body. Open it. Crag burst adopted a stance, and the muscles of his entire body shook like waves. Incorporeal waves of air burst forth in all directions. The layer of flames stuck to his body was forcefully blown away, scattering into sparks that filled the sky. Crag burst's naked body swept his gaze over the crashed aircraft in the distance. He let out another loud roar. The anger that he had been holding back along the way could finally be vented a little. At this time, Luonan's somewhat incoherent voice came from the hex ear. F***ck shit. Crag burst, I thought. You didn't die? Crag burst spat. Don't tell me that nickname is for nothing? Even if the rock cracked, I'll still be alive. Have you ever seen anyone survive a fuel-air bomb? That's me. Also, Scout, you must attend the association's beginner's seminar. The warning words are too unstandardized. If it's a long-range attack, the basic elements such as the direction, nature, and landing point should be stated first. Luonan's warning came before he could finish babbling. Dodge quickly. Get off the roadbed. It was still a non-standard warning, but this time he finally came up with some effective suggestions. Crag burst didn't say anything further. He rolled down the road. Half a second later, flames burst into the sky again. The powerful shockwave shattered most of the glass windows on both sides of the road. It was another wingless aircraft. This kind of small unmanned aircraft was used as a weapon platform. It had obviously learned its lesson from the previous one. Even when it was 1 kilometer away, it could still accurately lock onto the target's position with its radar and satellite positioning. With the range of Luonan's mental senses, Luonan was only able to detect and warn Xie after Xie's weapon had been fired. The pressure was enormous right now. Crag burst shrunk under the roadbed and protected his body from being engulfed by the flames. This was all he could do for the time being. He finally couldn't help but curse. Is this King gang? He should be a big arms dealer. Luonan spoke coldly. Isn't Quantum Corporation the world's top arms dealer? After the Deep Blue platform was developed, this was already the conclusion. Right, Quantum Corporation. Crag burst should have thought of this a long time ago, but the impression that Quantum Corporation was a top-notch high-tech corporation was too deep. It was really hard to connect them to the gangs of the recycling stratum. Even if they thought of collusion, they wouldn't have expected it to be to such an extent. Is this King War? He heavily smashed into the ground, unable to hold on any longer. He tumbled all the way away from the road, not daring to return to the cargo passageway. Instead, he charged towards the main building of the Deshang building. He charged into the building in one breath and walked a few dozen meters in before he could truly catch his breath. Right now, the gang's lair had been alarmed by the situation outside. Everyone stuck their heads out to look. Crag burst charged in furiously, instantly attracting everyone's gazes. It's that guy. Half an hour ago, Crag burst had engaged in a gunfight with the people here when he was chasing after Jack. The group of gangsters had a vivid memory of this brawny man with skin of copper and bones of iron. The group of gangsters immediately drew their weapons and brandished their sticks. And then. There was no then. Crag burst didn't even have time to make a move. Luonan had already knocked out the entire group. Even though the human-faced arachnid had degenerated into a wraith sign state, Knocking out these small fries at its current level was as easy as blowing off dust. In the end, all Cragburst did was find a relatively large person and strip off his clothes to cover his vital areas. The entire process didn't take more than 20 seconds, but Cragburst's expression was still ugly. We've been delayed for too long. Even if it's a heavy truck, it should be 10 kilometers away by now. What the hell is this guy thinking? Where does he want to take Ruewen? Ruewen's situation could be seen with a single glance. She had been implanted with a control device early on, which was why she didn't have the strength to fight back. This kind of situation would occasionally occur in other underground fighting arenas. It was mainly for the sake of safety. But this move of Jack's was clearly aimed at abducting someone. This was 2F** King Strange. Ruewen just awakened her ability. He wants to sell an ability user for money? Luo Nan recalled the conversation between the contact person and Jack. The contact person had said that any information related to Ruewen must be reported to Jack in time. Clearly, Ruewen had a special position in the underground fighting arena. Was it because Jack? More accurately speaking, was it because the power behind Jack had discovered Ruewen's potential early on? The wingless drone circled around the Deshang building. It constantly switched search methods, locked onto the target's position, and ensured that Ruewen couldn't rush out of the building to pursue Jack. Yen Yongbua sat quietly behind his office desk watching the live feed. A beep sounded from outside the door. Huyuli relied on his high level of authority to forcefully swipe the machine and push the door open to enter. He saw the image displayed on the holographic screen in front of Yen Yongbua, and his fury soared to the heavens. Assistant Yen, what the hell are you doing? It's as you can see. Providing fire support. Yen Yongbua didn't show any respect to the Quantum Corporation's Xia City Area Executive Director. But didn't even leave his chair. Huyuli slammed the table heavily. This is Xia City. This is Metropolis. This isn't the Deep Blue World. Do you know how many calls come in when armed drones fly? The mayor's office, the security bureau, the social security bureau, the city defense army? Yen Yongbua raised his head. His expression was calm, but the veins at the corner of his dark red eyes pulsed slightly. That feeling made Huyuli suddenly choke. His voice, tone, and attitude immediately lowered quite a bit. My boy, I'm going to retire immediately after this matter with the R&D district. If you want to ascend, I'll give you my full support. If you want the Rainbow Fund and the Investment Society, I'll give it to you without a second thought, okay? But you can't turn around and roast me over the fire. Chapter 128. Research Mission? Research requires the use of armed platforms? Huyuli felt that this was incomprehensible. My boy, I know you came from the Deep Blue World. That's right. Things there are very straightforward. The Apocalypse Laboratory is a core organization. Everything revolves around the laboratory. But I'll still say the same thing. This is Xia City. The government and the military are the ones who make the rules. We are a company. We should use money and connections to solve problems. This is what we should do. It doesn't matter who makes the rules. The assessment department and the methods determine everything. Yen Yongbua leaned back in his chair and interlaced his fingers. You are responsible to the company's board of directors. You need to accomplish your revenue targets. I am responsible to the laboratory. I need to accomplish my deadlines. If you can't accomplish your goals, you step down and bow. But what if I can't accomplish my mission? I won't even have a place to stand. This is where the difference between us lies. Huyuli took a deep breath. My boy, we all know each other's difficulties. But weren't things going well before? Everything is progressing according to plan. The personnel and equipment are all ready. We just need to move them to gear. This is an excavation mission. Its priority is just below research. I've seen your full cooperation these past few days, Director Hu. Excavation? Research? In the end, Huyuli was a high-level member of Quantum Corporation. He had been confused by the overly common title of research mission. But now that he heard Yen Yongbua emphasize it again, he suddenly understood. The research you speak of. Is it the Deep Blue Project or the Bloodline Project? Yen Yongbua raised his eyes to look at him. What do you think? Huyuli knew that he was about to retire as a high-level executive. It would be best if he didn't get too involved. He immediately took a deep breath. Fine. I was reckless this time. But my boy, no matter what the mission is, no matter how high the priority, there is nothing wrong with paying attention to a few methods. Right now, the company is very passive in Xia City because of this matter with the R&D district. The pressure on me is great. If I don't reverse this situation, many missions will be disturbed. Whether it's excavation or research. Don't you think so? Yin Yongbo wasn't blindly arrogant. Seeing that Hu Yuli had completely admitted defeat, he stood up with a smile and had his secretary bring 2 cups of coffee. Director Hu, it is unfortunate that an accident occurred. But no one expected that the human-faced arachnid would rebel, just like no one expected that it would be targeted. The human-faced arachnid was Plan A. We were close to success when it was destroyed, but this was not the end. Here was Plan B. We have done very well up until now. But the problem is that the road to happiness is strewn with setbacks. The highest priority has appeared and we have to prioritize. Fortunately, this should only be a temporary mission. As long as everything goes smoothly, we will only be nervous for 2 days at most. It won't affect the implementation of Plan B. I hope so. Hu Yuli didn't wait for the cup of coffee. He didn't even need to drink it. Right now, his heart was filled with bitterness. He immediately said his goodbyes. Yin Yongbo walked him to the door. When Hu Yuli was about to open the door, he hesitated for a moment. In the end, he could not help but turn around and say, "Can you answer a question? Please go ahead. I am very clear about the importance of excavating the Stargate. If we can control the deep blue world, we will completely change the course of human history. However, on what basis did that research have to be prioritized over the Stargate? Is it because of its taboo? This. My instructor in the laboratory, Mr. Li Wei, once said, everything can be delegated to mortals. Gods only need to control life." Yin Yongbo spread his hands. From his perspective, the research of life is the domain of gods. Humans and gods have different standpoints. Madman. Hu Yuli shot a cold glance at Yin Yongbo. He said no more and left with large strides. In the lower levels of the Deshang building, Cragburst gradually calmed down as time went on. After muttering to himself for a moment, he suddenly proposed, "I'll contact the society." Ha! There are dozens to 100 people in the fighting arena. If he doesn't take Rue Wen away, she will be targeted once she awakens her ability. The possibility of her being an ability user trafficker is very high. According to what I know, many underground powers have similar mechanisms to nurture venomous insects. They exhaust all methods to stimulate the potential of their targets, catalyze their awakening, and then sell them for money. Large companies and secret orders are all very good buyers. Cragburst said coldly, "When it comes to this sort of thing, we can only see one and eliminate one. Right now, this is no longer a matter of investigating you. This matter will be handled by the society. Even if it's Quantum Corporation, if they can't give us an explanation, we'll beat the fuck up." But just as he made his decision, he smashed a fist into his palm. The most important thing is still tracking. Luonan was quite helpless as well. Actually, with the speed of his soul, he could lock onto Jack if he wholeheartedly focused on tracking him. But Cragburst had been ambushed and pinned down, delaying him for such a long time. He might be able to catch up to the heavy truck, but Jack knew of the existence of the soul body. Would he just obediently stay in the truck and drive all the way out of the city? Not to mention that Quantum Corporation had already directly made their move. After covering fire, it was time to provide support and move. Xia City had a population of 200 million. Chapter 129. Perhaps he really could draw a picture. Cragburst's reminder reminded Luonan of his identity as a psychic. Though he was still muddle-headed about the principles involved, reality proved that he really did have talent in this area. Most importantly, Luonan had inspiration right now. This inspiration had existed ever since the start of the sacrificial ritual. The treacherous altar, the burning sea of clouds, the brilliant stars, the tempered sharpness, and of course the empty and silent domain of death in the end. Lines, composition, light and shade. All sorts of elements had been pondered in his mind for a long time. Luonan believed that even if this matter didn't happen, he would certainly carve this scene down when he returned home and observe it from time to time. At this very moment, a single thought was born, and the impulse to draw became exceptionally intense. However, from his several experiences drawing psychic diagrams, he knew that he needed to have a source and a direction before he put his pen to paper. He needed to add to the existing composition. But Luonan knew far too little about Rue Wen's past. Oh, this was easy to do. Luonan's mental senses were released with full force in an instant. The badly battered person in charge of the fighting arena, the panic-stricken spectators in the passageway, and the gangsters who were maintaining order while whispering to each other, no matter where these people were or what they were doing, all of them couldn't help but shiver at the same time. Ink, who had been with Cragburst this entire time, flapped its wings and flew back in the direction of the fighting arena, ignoring Cragburst's calls. Mr. Ma lay on the stretcher in a daze, his hand pressed against his chest. Even though he had already taken medicine and was on a ventilator, the palpitations and suffocation from a few minutes ago still followed him like a shadow. What in the world had happened? He was the director of a large biopharmaceutical company in Xia City. His net worth was in the hundreds of millions. People respectfully addressed him as Mr. Ma. Wealth and women were nothing more than decorations to him. His future was full of 60 to 70 years. What he needed was more vivid interest, more intense stimulation, and a higher level of accomplishment. What could be more interesting, more exciting, and more successful than dominating the lives of others? So Mr. Ma fell in love with the fighting arena. He fell in love with the smell of blood here. He invested in this place for the sake of changing the style of fighting to become more exciting and more exciting. Today the fighting arena had asked him to borrow his top-notch collection, the aberrant Great Ma Basilisk. He agreed without hesitation. In fact, he had purchased this mutant in order to add new tricks to the arena at some point in the future. His wish had come true ahead of time. But just a few minutes ago his most prideful collection, the Great Ma Basilisk worth tens of millions, fell to the ground in front of him, crumbling and rotting. The destruction of the collection was not the end of the world. However, that form, the will of death that descended in that instant, the terrifying power that far exceeded the limits of his control, gave him a heavy blow in the chest. Who caused all this? Ruiwen. The girl who struggled in the cage he had created. He remembered that 3 years ago when she had just arrived at the arena, she was so skinny that she looked like she was only 6 or 7 years old. It was only under the stimulation of drugs that she had grown to her current height. She was a genius grandmaster of combat. Subtracting the time of training, she had become the king of the arena, charging for 100 victories in a short year. But no matter what kind of genius she was always grasped in the palm of his hand. Every time he saw Ruiwen pretend to be calm, but from beginning to end she was in a desperate situation, Mr. Ma felt a sense of satisfaction arise spontaneously. Her fists were hard and fast, but no matter how fast or hard they were, they could not break through the transparent protective wall surrounding them. This was what it meant to be a ruler. This was pleasure. But why was it completely different today? From beginning to end, not even a strand of his hair had been harmed. But there was an invisible ice-cold hand clutching his throat, pressing him down on the ugly corpse of the basilisk, letting him savor the taste of fear and death to his heart's content. Ruiwen, that plunderer, the ominous crow, the exit is up ahead. The relieved voice of the medical personnel beside him rang out. The ambulance is already parked in the parking lot. Mr. Ma is first, and then, the sound of flapping wings rang out, practically flying over his head. The medical personnel cried out in alarm, "That crow is so big." Mr. Ma's eyes snapped open just as the stretcher exited the tunnel. In the changing light, the black silhouette of the crow flipped over people's heads, projecting a demonic silhouette of light and shadow. The medical personnel instinctively waved his hand to drive it away, only to receive a black feather fluttering down. It was like the demonic eye of the netherworld cast a glance. Ruiwen. Mr. Ma sat up all of a sudden, spurring his chi and blood to surge. The explosive sound of his heart became the rumbling sound of a funeral bell. He widened his eyes and fell backward. His final mournful scream was transmitted back, repeatedly refracting in the curved tunnel. Ruiwen. The huge crow flapped its wings and swept past. In an extremely short period of time, not a single person made a sound or moved in the entire passageway. Fear gripped their throats, and like an ice-cold tide, it swallowed them up one by one. Ruiwen. This name seemed to transform into a demonic incantation. From the outside to the inside, from him to me, it grew and spread from the bottom of my heart. Plunderer, the large crow, the flat-chested witch. Fragments of memories flipped endlessly, twisting together with emotions. They were truly like the sweeping wings of the crow before their eyes, painting a picture of deep foreboding and fear. The crow swept past the tunnel and crashed into the empty fighting arena. It spiraled in the air. In Luonan's eyes, the crow was piercing through a dark cloud of negative emotions. The outline of an altar was interwoven within the surging cloud layer. Several hundred blurry figures were running and shouting within. Compared to their earlier foolishness, they seemed to have a clearer definition of their own position. They had transformed from illusory rulers into actual pigs and sheep. Countless scenes of Ruewen's memories appeared and blended within the altar. The vast majority of them were fragmented and distorted. They combined to form a fuzzy image of Ruewen. Countless sides were pieced together, but it was far too biased. Luonan pondered. The Ruewen he saw was different from these people. Admittedly, Ruewen had contended against the human-faced arachnid and defeated it. Ruewen had beheaded the great Ma basilisk in one strike. She had left a deep impression on him. But the first impression Ruewen gave him was that of a young and inexperienced child with a towel covering her head in the waiting room. She had used childish words to converse with Mr. Crow. She had sunk deep into the circle of her own logic. Perhaps her self-identity leaned more toward that of a crow than a person. But no matter what, she was the one and only victor on Luonan's altar. She had sacrificed everything and reaped everything. Luonan was the bearer of the altar's framework. He had the obligation to bestow blessings upon the victor. Ink let out a coarse squawk that was absolutely not pleasant to listen to. But this hoarse voice surged together with a call on the mental plane. It was suddenly thrown into the night sky of Xia City, the sole victor, Ruewen. The dark clouds surged and churned. A bright and resplendent star rose beyond the heavens. Its sharp radiance swept through the clouds and mist. The outline of the altar's structure became unprecedentedly clear. It was just like the shape of Luonan's pyramid. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.